of the Adults Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd just like to remind everybody present that the meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I ask you to ensure that your mobile phones are either switched off or on silent? And can you please switch your microphone on when speaking and turn it off when you have finished? We've received apologies from Mr. Harrison, with Mrs. Maggie Wright acting as his substitute, and from Dr. Bremner with Mrs. Rosita Page acting as his substitute. So without any further ado, we're going to agenda item 1, which is minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of January 2019. Do I have a proposal there, correct?
Yes, I'll move that, Chairman.
Oh, you got beat to it by Betty. Would you like to second it?
I will.
That's very kind. I know. All those that are happy? Right, thank you, agreed. Right, agenda item 2, question time. Received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. We've received no questions from members. Under agenda item 4, I've not been notified of any urgent items. And under agenda item 5, does any member have any interest they wish to declare that they haven't already done so? We always take, obviously, as read the membership of district and parish councils. But anyone got anything else? No? Excellent. There are no declarations from the party whips in accordance with the Overview and Scrutiny Committee Procedure Rule 16. And there are no presentations of petitions under Standing Order 36. So the first main item on the agenda is the review of the long-term residential and nursing care fees, which is pages 11 to 66. And I'll invite John Wilson and to kick off, or is it Sandy? In which case I'll invite Sandy to kick off.
Thank you, Chair. With your agreement, I'm going to go through this in quite a bit of detail, actually, because it's quite a complicated consultation. So I just wanted to make sure that I'd covered it in sufficient detail for the committee to be able to discuss it. On the 16th of April, Cabinet authorised the Director to commence a 2-stage consultation and propose changes to the way the Council pays prices for care homes. And a previous report came to this committee in November last year, prior to the first stage of consultation. And the purpose, I think, of today is to advise the committee of the key issues that were raised in stage 1, to outline the proposals to be considered in stage 2, and to give the committee an opportunity to comment on the proposals to be put forward in stage 2. The 2 stages of the process. The first stage covered really the architecture of the fee arrangements, and the second stage will look at the financial and contractual arrangements and the proposals for how the new arrangements would be implemented. The Council has engaged SIPFA SECO, referred to in the report as SECO, who are the consultancy arm of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance. And they were commissioned by the Council to develop an independent local cost of care review. In terms of stage 1 of the fee review, the process is outlined in paragraphs 5 to 14. I'd like to point out one factual error in the report, which is in paragraph 9. And the sentence that reads, 16 providers representing 26 care homes attended consultation meetings and commented on the proposals using that mechanism, should actually read that there were 14 providers representing 35 care homes that attended the consultation meetings. So apologies for that change. So there were slightly fewer providers, but they actually represented more care homes. Unfortunately, there was a relative low level of responses to the actual consultation questionnaire. And actually only 6 of those were returned by providers, which was lower than we'd expected. So just to give you a bit of background to that, that we did send out the questionnaire to all providers, and we sent 2 reminder emails in December and January reminding providers of the consultation. Of those providers, 71 of them accessed the website that was established for the consultation, and there were 146 unique visitors, but say only 6 of those actually resulted in a questionnaire being submitted. And there is a link later on between that low response rate and some of the issues that we have in terms of actually having sufficient data to be able to complete all of the financial modelling that we would need to do. We did also contact 14 different advocacy and representative organisations, and we also met with Healthwatch as part of the process. But we didn't actually have any written submissions from any of those organisations. In terms of the issues which were raised during the consultation, we consulted on 6 different proposals, not just run through each of those. In terms of having 2 bands for older people, and by bands, what I'm talking about is 2 different essentially specifications for the kind of care that people would need. So we've got one level of care which we're calling residential, which is people who require 24-hour care in a residential care home or residential nursing home. And then there's residential plus, which is essentially the same thing but with a greater level of complexity and a higher level of care input. So essentially, people in residential plus would require more one-to-one personal care and more assistance with daily living or with managing their behaviour. For instance, if they had challenging behaviour or if they had advanced dementia. And there was a broad support for the 2 bandings and the definitions that we'd use to define those 2 different bands of care. In terms of the second proposal, which was to use the care funding calculator, which is a national tool for calculating the cost of complex care for working age adults, with a standardised approach to calculating the costs of the non-staffing elements of it, particularly the accommodation. There were a number of issues raised about having a standardised approach to that, but no other concerns were raised about the approach. The third proposal, which was to review the Council's cost template, which is essentially looking at the items which you take into account when you're calculating the cost of care, was broadly supported. Proposal 4, to have a standardised annual process for reviewing fees, again, was broadly supported. Proposal 5, which was to pay the Leicestershire rate for care for placements made outside of Leicestershire, there was no support for changing the Council's approach to paying, and all the respondents who responded wanted to see us continuing the current approach of applying the local cost of care and not applying the Leicestershire rate outside of Leicestershire. And the 6th proposal, which was to refresh the core contract, which is the contract that all care homes have with the Council, and the specification, which is the way in which we define what should be delivered as part of residential care. There was broad support for that, but there were mixed views about the proposal to remove the quality premium payments for the quality assessment framework, with current recipients who get those quality premiums not seeing the advantage of those being changed. In terms of stage 2 of the consultation, the proposals for the process and the proposals to be put out for consultation for the second stage are summarised in paragraphs 34 to 45 of the report, and in more detail in Appendix D of the report, which was circulated separately, so you'll have received that under separate cover. Proposal 1 for stage 2 is regarding the proposed banded rates for older people. So using the SECO work as the basis, the Council proposes for older adult placements that the residential band should be set at a rate which is still to be confirmed, and that the residential rate would be set at another rate, with a supplementary standard rate for supplementary allowances set at an hourly rate, again to be established. So just in terms of understanding that, that's really what I was referring to earlier on, and that we have still got further work to do in terms of validating the work from SECO as a result of the lack of the data that we've had. So the bands assume that residents placed on the residential band will require an average of 19 hours of individual care per week, and that ones placed on residential care will require 24 hours of one-to-one care within that, and that will be used as the basis for the calculation. Proposal 2 is in relation to the proposed band rate for working age adults in homes in Leicestershire. So in line with the recommendation of SECO, the Council proposes for working age adult placements that there'll be a working age banding set. Again, that is still to be confirmed following the Council completing the process of due diligence to verify the calculations. Therefore, the rates themselves will not currently be available. The care funding calculator will be used as it currently is to calculate the individual costs of care where needs are greater than those that can be met within the working age adults band. In terms of proposal 3, there will be the annual uplift mechanism. So in line with the SECO recommendation, the Council proposes that the banded rates are increased annually on a blended rate based on a combination of the average weekly earnings, so that's based on a benchmark figure for average weekly earnings, and the consumer prices index, so general inflation. And the blend between that split is yet to be determined. Proposal 4 is regard to the proposed contractual arrangements, and we need to ensure the contract is reflective of current legislation, best practice and guidance, and the working has now been updated and new clauses will be added in relation to those changes in legislation. Again, we'll be consulting on those changes. And the 5th final proposal is regarding the proposed implementation approach. So this is really about how people will transfer from the current arrangements into the new arrangements. So the intention is to automatically transfer as many cases as possible to the new appropriate banding automatically. Those with more complex payment arrangements will be transferred to the most appropriate new banding following an individual review. And to expedite the implementation, the Council intends to establish a proportionate review process to support this implementation. In terms of next steps, we are hoping to commence stage 2 of the consultation within the next 2 weeks, but the consultation clearly can't start until we've established the fee rates themselves and those are known, and the consultation will last for 6 weeks. The outcomes of both stages of the consultation for the proposed fee structure and the financial implications of this will be presented to Cabinet at its meeting at the end of June for a final decision, and subject to the Cabinet's approval, implementation of the new rates will be backdated to the 8th of April 2019. And the committee is invited to comment on the proposals being put forward to in stage 2 of the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Members wishing to speak? Ms Newton.
My first question really is on page 12, paragraph 9. The consultation, there was feedback received from more providers supporting older adults than working age adults. Will that actually skew the outcomes of the consultation, because there's different needs, I think, in both groups?
I think those are the responses to stage one. Those, clearly we don't know what the responses to the second stage would be, and we're hopeful that we'll get a higher level of responses. And there are more providers of services for older people, so you'd expect that there would be more. I think the changes are probably have more impact on older adults, because we're changing the banding structure, and we're making which is quite fundamental, I think, really, to how people are paid. With working age adults, the position now is that most placements are made on a bespoke fee anyway, and that arrangement will continue. So I don't think it's surprising that the people who are most likely to be affected are more likely to respond.
Is it the case that those who may have responded most are self-funders?
Well, actually, no, we haven't really had responses from residents or their families. So there haven't been a lot of response from either council-funded residents or self-funding residents, although we have, it's clearly an open consultation, and we did also write to everybody who's on a deferred payment agreement, because they'll be directly affected. Two of those people their families did respond and ask for more information, but we didn't get a formal response from any of them.
Mrs Wright.
Thank you. Page 13.15, regarding the supplementary needs allowance, are they capped? Are those supplementary payments capped? So if we're going to 2 banding levels, I just need to get a little bit of clarification, or would like some clarification on the supplementary needs allowance. Are they actually then capped to a figure, or how does that work? And the second point, if I may, the calculation for the working age group doesn't, when reading the paper, doesn't seem very popular. Is there any alternative that exists for that? Thank you.
Thank you. No, there won't be a cap. What we're doing is introducing a system of linking supplementary needs allowances to the amount of support that people need. So we've established within residential and residential plus how much care is expected. If people require care that's in excess of that, then we'll work out how much additional care that is, and essentially apply an hourly rate to that level of care. So we just would multiply the amount of care by the hourly rate, and that would then become what the supplementary needs allowance would be. So if someone requires an extra 5 hours over and above what's in the council specification, then we'd pay 5 times the supplementary hourly rate, and that's how it would be calculated. In relation to the responses on the care funding calculator, well, I think at the moment the arrangements for using that as there's a different rate being applied by different providers based on what their costs are. So, and we're talking here principally not about the staffing costs, but the non-staffing costs. So the non-staffing costs would be the cost of the actual accommodation itself, utilities, maintaining the property, maintaining the garden, all those kinds of costs. And at the moment, providers are essentially submitting their own costs for those. That means that some providers are getting paid more than others. I think the council's view is that's not a fair way to do it, because actually we shouldn't be paying different rates. We should be paying similar rates for those, because we're not there to sort of kind of cross-subsidise arrangements, and we should have a standard element of payment as we do for staffing costs. So that's really what we're doing to try and get some standardisation around that. And clearly, providers who feel that they might not, that might be disadvantaged by that standardised approach are likely then to say they don't think that's a fair way of doing it. And that's the kind of response we've had with people saying, well, if we aren't paid the rates we're paid now, then they won't reflect our costs. Where I think the council's view is that the council should be taking a view about what reasonable costs are on paying those.
Mr. Parton.
I'm thinking of the consultation. It looks from 9, 10 and 11 that the county council did all can be reasonably expected of them to seek providers to engage in the consultation. When you look at the numbers, and as I say, this is not criticism at all of the county council, because as I say, you can see that you've emailed, you've wrote, the word contacted has been used, but the figures of the responses back, like in number 9 it's 258 visits, 4 completions. Number 10 it's you contacted 15 groups, you got none back, and in 11 you contacted 69 and got 2 back. What without presuming or surmising, what do you think, or could at some point some feedback be sought from providers in what were the reasons you didn't respond?
I mean, clearly there's been a lot of engagement with providers. And I think a significant number of providers felt because they had attended previous meetings when there was earlier engagement and given their views there, and they felt those had been listened to and registered, perhaps they didn't feel that they needed to express them formally as part of the consultation. I think the other thing is the consultation isn't finished. We've still got a further stage of the consultation to do, and we're also being clear that if people want to raise issues which were dealt with in stage 1 as part of stage 2, they can still do that. So the process isn't over, and we still very much want to encourage the providers to do, and actively encouraging them to take part within that. And I've recently met with MCare, who are the representative organisation for care homes, and I know they're particularly keen to respond to the second stage of consultation. So I think when it becomes much clearer, I suppose, what the financial implications are again for providers, I think they may be more willing to give their views on what they think the consequences of those prices will be for them.
Yeah, because you have engaged admirably with them, and you're continuing to do so. But could we say that we could monitor the number of responses going forward, and at some point, once the decisions have been made and passed and implemented, to almost ascertain some feedback from some people as to why they felt despite the county council's best efforts, they chose not to respond.
We'll certainly be monitoring the numbers of responses, and we will be continuing to actively, encourage people, chase them up, remind them of the deadlines. We definitely will be doing that. I suppose you kind of, it's very hard to know why someone isn't responding. But I anticipate there will be a higher response rate in stage 2. I think that's very likely. All the indications are of that. And if for any reason we feel we're not getting sufficient responses, we will take active steps. And one of the key ways is we will be actively contacting people rather than just waiting for them to fill out forms. We're certainly not taking a passive approach to it.
Just finally, just for quick clarification.
Can you just remember to come back to the chair before you come back in? It's not a take question and answer session. So if you can address your questions through the chair.
Right, okay, I apologise. What do you mean by contacted?
Well, I mean, part of that will be about emailing people to remind them, but I also expect that we've got a number of forums which providers attend, which will be inviting them to respond to the consultation, and I mean I'll certainly be actively talking to MCare, who are the representative body, who I think are in a different position because they're not a provider themselves; they are a representative body, and I will be meeting with them during the second stage of consultation.
Just before I come to you, Mr. Crooks, I can see that the portfolio holder wanted to say something. So, Mr. Blunt.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I'll try and help Ted. I think if you were providing a service to the County Council and they said they were going to review it, and the stage one was just to say they're going to review it, and you may well hold off until you knew what that review was going to say. So I think the fact we broke it into two parts would explain, it would almost be presumptuous to come in and say straight away, well, we're not sure about this, because until they see it. So I guess, first of all, because we're doing it very carefully to make sure we're doing it properly, is we're just explaining the principles first of all. I think, in my opinion, that's the main reason why people haven't come back to us. I feel sure more will come back when they actually see the details of our proposal.
Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Bottom of page 14, where it talks about out-of-county placements, there doesn't seem to be any appetite to alter the rates. Is there a major difference between the Leicestershire ones and the other counties that we pay the rates to?
Well, I mean, there isn't a standardised rate across the country, so there are different rates in different local authorities. I think one of the problems in making comparisons is apples and pears, because not everybody has the same banding rate. Some have different rates, say for dementia and for other services, which we don't do. So it's very hard to make direct comparisons. I mean, I think currently our fees are probably on average probably a little bit lower than others in the region, but not the lowest. So I think, and so if you look at other parts of the country where costs are much higher, both salary costs and property costs, the fees are significantly higher. But in the Midlands, which is probably where we'd make a comparison, our fee rates are probably below average.
So why do we think that there's no appetite to change them? Because if they're getting better rates, it sounds like they're getting better rates in other counties than what they are in Leicestershire. Why are our people worried about that?
Well, I wouldn't like to say on their behalf that they're not worried, and I think that if you spend any time with people who run residential care anywhere in the country, you would find concerns being raised about the level of funding going into social care generally, and residential care in particular. So I don't think there's a lack of concern about that. I think one of the I wouldn't like to characterise the responses we've had so far as a lack of interest. I think it's much more. I think, as kind of Councillor Blunt was saying, it's more about they want to see exactly what the financial implications are before they comment, and I suppose this is also a market, and the County Council is not the only purchaser of residential care. So we're a minority purchaser of residential care. So the majority of people buying residential care in Leicestershire are self-funders who are paying their fees from their own resources directly to the provider, so I think that there is a market rate, and that's one of the issues for the council is if we pay too far below that market rate, we wouldn't be able to find placements. So we have to have payment arrangements which are fair, paying a fair price for care, and they also have to be at a rate that we can actually buy the care that people need.
Just before I come on to further questions, I know John and Richard both want to come on to this point as well.
Yes, thank you. So I was just going to partly make the point that Sandy made at the end there, which is that in order to purchase care, we have to have a rate that is fair and reasonable. Partly because that's what the law says, and partly because if we didn't do that, clearly providers would not wish to work with us in terms of finding placements for people. I think the issue about the out of area, essentially what providers are saying to us is that it seems fair and reasonable to them that Leicestershire pays the local market rate, whatever that local market rate is. We know, as Sandy said, that rates vary from authority to authority for all sorts of reasons. Traditionally, we have paid the local market rate. As part of the consultation, we just wanted to test with providers whether that was still the preferred option, and they've told us that that's what they would prefer.
Right, so we're now taking a question from James Fox, who is will be speaking to us later. Let's get his title right. He's the Safeguarding Board Business Manager. No, it's not.
That's
Michael Smith from wherever. Healthwatch, sorry. Apologies, I'm useless. It's been one of those days. Michael Smith from Healthwatch wants to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. And it's really just you talked about the meetings that you've had with providers, and I was very fortunate to kind of meet with your colleagues kind of as part and parcel of the planning process. But are you planning to have any kind of meetings with families and members of the public? It's given the consultation topic, it's something that if you just read it, you're kind of not sure where the relevance comes from, and if you get the chance to face-to-face kind of discuss it, it becomes much more understandable and digestible.
Currently, I don't think we've got plans to meet with the public, because to some extent it's how do you select that group of people? Because I suppose all of us could potentially either be users of residential care, or a family member could be. But I suppose it's trying to get people who've got a direct interest. So because of that issue about how you select people, we haven't done that. But if Healthwatch want to work with us to organise some more kind of public events to talk about it, I'm happy we'd have that discussion to do that. But I think, I suppose it's one of these things you don't know you need it until you need it. So I suppose we think what we're trying to do is get a more in tune group of people who maybe have got a direct interest in it rather than a theoretical interest, and we'd be very happy to do that.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I think it's been intimated that there was a lower response because they hadn't got the full implications of what increases we were thinking of or the costing levels. I note that the second consultation process starts next week and runs until the 29th of April. Will the facts and figures then about the proposed or what we're thinking of doing in the way of increasing costs be available for that consultation? Because it's very hard to reply to a consultation which is review the long-term care fees if you haven't got an idea what there may be in the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. I think I can answer that one. We know that the consultation will not go out until those fees are available. So there may be some slippage in the date, I understand from the Chairman's briefing earlier. What I would ask, and I'm sure all of us would want it, is once those figures are known, could they be made available to this group at the same time, including any substitutes we have here today? Because I think that's something we'd all like to see, if I've read the mood of the meeting properly. Right, thank you.
Sorry, can I just come back?
You can.
Therefore, I am presuming that all the interested parties, particularly the ones that have already responded, are now sort of in a bit of a limbo situation because they don't know when the consultation's going to start, or is there a idea of when the date would be? Because you may end up again, or we may, with no one responding because they didn't know they were supposed to respond.
Well, I think there will be no second consultation until we got the figures, but we'll ask Sandy if he can give us some indication of the final deadline day by which this will go out.
Yes, Chair, I can confirm absolutely that the consultation won't start until we're able to kind of fill in the gaps, as it were, on put a number in against the fee rates. We're hoping that the consultation will start within 2 weeks, but that is all dependent on us completing the necessary due diligence work. At this stage, I think we feel that 2 weeks is a reasonable timescale for us to be able to do that, and that's definitely what we're aiming to do. But clearly, it will take as long as it takes for us to be able to complete that work and actually finalise those figures. Just to mention, I briefed MCare this morning, who are the representative body. I briefed them in relation to that, and they're obviously, as we are, would rather that we were going to be proceeding on the 18th, but they understand the position that we're in, and they're still happy to work with us on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Oh.
Mrs. Froggs. Oh, thank you. Ms. Newton.
Page 17, paragraph 42. It seems to me, reading that paragraph, that there may be an awful lot of work involved in terms of assessing the eligibility of people. I just wonder, are you confident that you'll be able to do it with? Do you have enough staff to do it with in the deadline that's there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I say we are hoping that most people will transfer automatically. So we're looking at a minority of people, but we have worked out, we think, the number of people we think that we will have to assess, and we've prioritised those assessments. They will be proportionate, so we won't be doing a kind of complete reassessment of the person. We'll just be trying to understand the complexity of that person's needs and exactly which band they should be in, and whether any supplementary needs allowance should be applied to their care. And we have prioritised that work within the review team, and we will make sure that they've got sufficient staff to complete that work.
Mrs. Wright.
My question more or less follows on, really, and is there a potential that anybody could miss out, any service user could miss out by being rebanded? Because it's a complicated situation. Do they have advocates that could help them? Because a lot of people, particularly people with dementia and that, won't be aware of the banding levels, etc., and won't be able to challenge if they feel it wasn't appropriate anyway. So I'm just wondering how that will be dealt with.
Well, clearly, if anyone requires advocacy, we could help with that. But by and large, if people don't have capacity, and that will affect a lot of people, the discussions would take place with their representative, their family member, to have that discussion. So we wouldn't be expecting people with dementia to have those discussions necessarily. We'd be talking to the representative as part of that process. And actually, again, for the great majority of people where the council's paying for care, the actual fee that the council pays doesn't necessarily determine what the individual pays. Someone will have an assessed charge, and that charge applies no matter how much the care costs. It's kind of capped to that person's ability to pay. So for the great majority of people, the fee that's paid affects the council and affects the provider. It doesn't necessarily affect the individual. Now, the people who are in a different position of that are the people who pay the full cost of care, and a lot of those are on the deferred payments, which is where essentially a charge is put against their house, and the council pays the cost of care until the house is sold, and then the council reclaims the costs from the sale of the house. And that's why we consult with those people, because those people are directly affected by the decision that we make on the fee. Well, I suppose because it's difficult for me to give a kind of definitive answer on that because everyone's financial circumstances are different. But where people are paying an assessed charge based on their income, which is the case for most people we're paying for the care, because we're paying for the care because they don't have sufficient means to pay for the care. Therefore, the council pays for the care, and then there's a charge which is applied to the individual based on their income. Those people won't be affected. People are actually paying the full cost of care, where the council's made the arrangements or where they've got deferred payment, they actually potentially would have to pay more as a result, because the council's paying more if they're paying the full cost, and they will end up paying more. So those people might have to pay more, but nobody will be required to pay more than they've been financially assessed to pay.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a short one. With everything that has been said previously, page 18, paragraph 49, could you please explain that to me? Because with everything you set in mind, then it finishes off, implementation of the new rates will be backdated from April the 1st, 2019. So if the consultation of everything doesn't, so can you just talk me through that, because that is confusing me a little bit.
Thank you. If I could just clarify one point, actually, that should actually say the 8th of April. It says the 1st of April, but actually should be the 8th of April. And the reason why it's the 8th of April is that we backdate to the first pay run within the financial year, and that's how we always do our annual up rates, because otherwise it gets horrendously complicated, because that's also when the benefit changes are applied. And it's also means we'd have to cover more than one financial period, and it gets very difficult. So we always backdate to the first pay run. What I'd say is, given it's the 8th of April, that we will, no matter when the consultation starts and finishes and when the decision is made, the council's made a commitment to backdate to April. So if the consultation is delayed and there's a delay in taking the report to Cabinet, if that were to happen, we would still backdate to April in terms of the increase. Hope that clarifies it.
Yes, if I may. So how will that affect, self-funders or people who are not aware of it? Have we taken that into consideration?
Well, in terms of people who are self-funding, who are making their own arrangements and not being made through the council, like none of these arrangements will affect them. So those people, the council doesn't have a contract to pay for their care, isn't responsible for paying for their care. They've got their own arrangements with the providers of the home where they're resident. So these arrangements will not affect them in any way, really. Where the council is making those arrangements, yes, there could be an implication in terms of that backdating, because those individuals would be responsible for paying the cost of care.
If I may, but they are being made aware that this could happen, because, you could be expecting it and you could be budgeting, and all of a sudden an increase hits you. So, it could have some effects, so they'll all be made aware that this.
Yeah, I think we will make sure that individuals are aware of the circumstances, and if there's any individual who feels that they haven't been treated fairly, of course we'll look at those circumstances.
John, I think you wanted to add something on.
Thank you. Yes, just to pick up that point. I mean, obviously, as Sandy said at the beginning of his presentation, in terms of the first stage of the consultation, and again in terms of the second stage of the consultation, there are a number of areas where we're making people aware of the process, and all of those timescales were within the first stage consultation as well as the second stage. So we've been very clear about that all the way through. I think it's also probably worth just noting that there are a group of people who may in fact benefit from the changes. So where there is currently what's called a third-party top-up agreement in place. So this is where the council currently pays its standard fee rate. the care home might have a higher cost for care, and the family may be asked to make up the difference and top up that fee rate. Potentially, if the local authority fee rate increases, then the gap between the authority's fee rate and the cost of care comes down, and therefore families may benefit from that difference being much smaller in the future. And again, because we'll be backdating to the beginning of April from whenever the decision is made, there may therefore be a potential that we have to rebate people and rebate families for the difference. So there is a potential that people also gain, as well as potentially, as Sandy mentioned, there will be some people who are affected disproportionately.
Right, I think that means I get to ask the last question. Just a quick one from me. Whilst we haven't got the definitive figures yet, do we have some sort of ballpark indication of what percentage increase we'd be looking at, and therefore whether it's covered off within the MTFS budget that we currently have available?
It's difficult to say. I'd rather not give a percentage that might indicate what that fee might be. I think it's quite important that we do the due diligence that we need to do. I think it's quite important that the council is assured that the fee modelling and that the factors which are and the assumptions which are being made around that fee modelling is robust before we have any indication to the public or to providers of what the fees may be, because what we don't want to do is kind of set hairs running ahead of the consultation. We've talked about all the people who might be affected. It would be very unfair to give them any potential figures and then have to come back to them and say, actually, it's something different. So I would be reluctant to give any kind of percentage uplift or give any indication of what that might be at this stage. In terms of the council having made provision, then we are assured that there is sufficient provision within the MTFS to account for the potential increase that this may bear on the council. Obviously, the council needs to and has taken account. We've been working on this now since last summer. So we have had very close conversations and discussions with colleagues in corporate resources and in the finance department, and we are assured that we have sufficient provision in place.
Richard?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think just thank everybody for the questions. It's an incredibly complex area. Every time you picked up people who are here, but just for standing in today, this is just one of 20 or 30 different areas as complex as this. I think the basic principle, as I see it, is that there's a belief that the amount of money going into this sector is not sufficient to make it work long term. So the idea of the review is to make sure that we're supporting those homes to continue with their care. So this is an exercise in some ways to put more money into this part of what we do, because we know it's important. Because if we don't have those homes doing what they're doing now in the future, then we'll have a bigger problem.
Sorry, we're now moving on to agenda item 9, which is capital investment into adult social care accommodation-based support services, which is pages 67 to 72. And as there's only Sandy sitting there, I assume it's Sandy going to be doing it. I had Fiona on my sheet as well.
Thank you, Chair. So in November, this committee received a report following the Cabinet approving market engagement on the development of a capital investment plan in adult social care. And this report is giving you an update on the work that's been undertaken since then. So today's report gives you an update following the market engagement and the proposals and options which are now underway as a result of that. And there's a summary of the market engagement which is outlined in paragraphs 11 to 13. I think it was a very good piece of market engagement, and we had quite a lot of providers who engaged with us. So these were people who were just straightforward developers, people who were landlords, and people who were providers who were providers of social care services. And that's really given us a lot of really useful intelligence to help shape our proposals. So the proposals for priority developments were outlined in paragraphs 14 to 18. So these are to create an investment prospectus, which is essentially the council setting out what it intends to do, where it intends to make investments, and the assets and resources it has available to make those things happen. To establish a transparent process for developing opportunities which are brought forward by developers. So currently we've just dealt with those on a fairly ad hoc basis. So a provider comes and says, I've got this piece of land, I want to build an extra care scheme on it, and we've looked at that on its merits and made a kind of tactical decision as to whether to make that. I think we want to make that a more transparent strategic process, so that we've got a clearer set of criteria about what we'll make investments in and why. We're going to be reviewing our procurement and contractual processes, because a lot of the feedback from providers was that if we had alternative ways of procuring and of awarding contracts, we could get more mutually beneficial arrangements for both ourselves, service users, and for the providers. So we're going to ensure that we've reviewed those and we come up with a range of options which work for all parties and provide both good outcomes and better value for the council. And then the third area is we'll be exploring the option of developing a housing company. And that's something that's been done more widely than adult social care by the council, but we're looking at the implications for that in terms of adult social care investment. And then lastly, there'll be a range of priority developments outlined in the report, which will be brought to Cabinet in May. And the committee are invited to comment on the proposals and the findings for the market engagement.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you. I think this is really interesting, and I think it's also very prudent, because we, as it outlines in paragraph 6, we have got a rising ageing population and care needs. And most of us also being mindful that children services tend to need more and more money, and an awful lot of old people probably feel a little bit disadvantaged, especially getting older myself. What I really like to ask, it is what are we doing to work with districts in order to work all of this into their local plans, and in order to accommodate a long-term strategy, because really we need to look at 2031, 2050, because if we are pursuing the building agenda and we are attracting more and more people into our districts and areas, we are also attracting middle-aged people who are very soon are going to be part of the aging population. Therefore, I foresee this going up. So just talk me through your long-term plans and how you're going to work it all together to ensure that there are provisions in the long term and needs will be addressed through the local plans as well.
Yes, no, it's a good question, because clearly the nature of the developments that we're wanting to pursue in the future will require a partnership approach across not just within the county council, but across the district council and borough councils as well. We have had initial conversations with the district and borough councils. Those conversations were received very well. I think that there is an understanding across both county and district and borough councils that there is a requirement to develop accommodation that's going to meet the needs of an increasingly ageing population. As you know, there are significant developments due to take place across the county over the next few years, so it's an opportune time to have those conversations, and the local plans are being developed over the next 1 or 2 years. We will be going back to the district and borough councils to consult on the investment plan and to engage with them on that and to seek some assurance around that, because the investment plan will have detail in it around the sorts of natures of developments that we want to see in different parts of the county. It will also have some information about what the county council can bring in terms of those developments, but equally if there are also areas that we can work with the district and boroughs and think about what they can bring to that those developments, that would also be very helpful. We've worked with colleagues in the Strategic Housing Partnership all the way through this process, and they have been engaged, officers from the districts have been engaged in that. I spoke directly with the chief officers from the district and borough councils, and they were very welcoming of having a conversation. So absolutely we want to work in partnership, not just with providers and developers, but also with the districts and borough councils.
May I just come back through you, Chairman? Would it then not be prudent to ensure that this is happening, to reflect that in your proposals and options?
Said absolutely, and the investment prospectus that we put together will include those details.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much, Chair. While we're talking about that, on page 70, the timetable for decisions, I am showing my ignorance here, but does the word iteration really mean draft? It's under timetable for page 21. It says the report will be submitted and will provide the first iteration. I did pass my O-level in English, but I didn't go to university, so probably my education's lacking a bit.
I'm sure that's not the case. By iteration, what we mean is that the investment prospectus is intended to be quite a dynamic document. It won't just be a document that's produced on a given date. So the idea would be that every year we would update the document and reflect changes to either the priorities that we have within the document or changes to the landscape or to developments. It might be that there are changes to local plans, for example, that we need to reflect within the prospectus. So it's meant to kind of reflect the fact that the document will be a live document that will be updated on a regular basis. So when it says iteration, it just means that would be the point at which we would launch the prospectus, but then we'd expect that prospectus will be updated on a regular basis.
Ms. Newton.
Much. I'm quite happy with some of the responses you've given so far. I just wanted to go to page 70 where your priority developments are. Can I say I'm absolutely delighted because learning disability needs, mental health needs, dementia, these are all of the groups really that are not really accommodated the way we ought to accommodate them in general housing. So I wanted just to say absolutely delighted with that, but I do understand very much the funding of such schemes is really dependent on partnership working. Can I ask whether the partnership is out there, whether it's local councils providing housing or whether you have other partners in mind?
Well, picking up on Rosita's question, who's definitely firmly still middle-aged, and Betty, who also is middle-aged, is the fact that the reality of housing is that if you think about every local authority we know,
yes,
they're in the business of caring for people, many of which are quite elderly.
Absolutely.
The turnover in council stock is very low because actually people stay for life. So they've sort of got a problem.
And living longer as well.
They've got a problem because overall their accommodation isn't suitable as people go through their 70s, into their 80s and into their 90s. These are life expectancy 87 sitting here today, I think, isn't it? Which is unheard of. So therefore their needs are actually very similar to ours. So bringing those two together, the local plan is more complex, of course, the planning authority, but actually overall it's quite logical we do work together. In terms of the investment, putting money into anything that's backed by the county council for private sector is quite attractive through you, Chairman. So therefore they're quite interested in when we can find innovative ways of providing care for people going forwards, but actually makes somebody else some money. So we provide better care, the councils get better, people get better care as well, and the money comes in from outside. So it's also part of the long-term plan, as everybody who sits on this committee knows, is the only way we can continue to have any hope of either being on budget or under budget is by doing things differently. Now, that doesn't mean doing things on the cheap, it means doing it better and creating a saving. So this isn't guaranteeing to deliver a saving, but it's hoping to improve the service with an expectation and hope that it'll give us better value for money by targeting the money where it's needed most.
Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Same page, actually. Page 70 seems to be quite popular. The 5 proposed development sites, which I noticed could be in Hinckley and Bosworth, and the largest one in Hinckley and Bosworth of 50 units, are they going to be owned by the county, or are we looking for outside finance, and are they going to be run by the county, or is it going to be run by private people, or don't we know yet?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think that there won't be a single model for how that's done. I think that it depends on the nature of the partnership and what offers best value for the council and what is workable in terms of what other partners are able to do. So I think we're going to have a different model. We're looking at developing a 4-place block of flats from a large extra care scheme. It's quite likely to be a different model. I think in terms of will the council own the buildings, I think again will depend on really what the relationship is with the other partners, who owns the land, but also what the financial model is and what the benefits are for the council. So the council isn't necessarily interested in being a provider of services, but may well own the building and look at the building as a way of generating a revenue stream and therefore paying for the cost of it. Or it may actually be that it's beneficial for all parties, for another party to own the building and the council to commission the care. So I think it's going to depend on the individual circumstances and the nature of the partnership that exists. But I mean, certainly there will be real advantages in the council owning some assets, because the council can borrow money at more advantageous rates of interest, and may also be able to generate significant revenue benefits from doing that. But you've got to look at these things in the round, and the council has to overall look at a deal that works well, both in terms of managing demand for services, in its ongoing revenue costs for paying for the services it commissions, but also what the costs and benefits are of owning the assets.
I'm going to get it right this time, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just a kind of a question around the providers of the services when all the buildings are finally built, and it's around the kind of a worrying issue that we heard around a provider that wasn't really kind of prepared for the level of complexity and need that the people they were caring for, and the community issues that then kind of created. So I suppose there's a roundabout question of making sure that the providers really understand who they're going to be caring for, and how you're going to create a kind of a seamless integration within the community that surrounds them.
Thank you, Chair. I think this report is primarily concerned with the investment and the accommodation elements, but clearly the council's at least as interested in the quality of the support that people receive while they're there. And the investments here are largely going to be in the areas of investment where the current market finds it most difficult to make the investments, which are likely to be in services for people who are more complex, and that inevitably means that those people are going to have higher levels of support. and we have to make sure that those levels of support are appropriate, and we've got to make sure that we've got providers who are able to provide care at that level of complexity. And it is a difficult area, and there are real concerns, I think, nationally about the kinds of care offered to people with dementia, people with very complex needs and learning disabilities and behaviours that challenge. And those are some of the most difficult areas for us to commission and for providers to provide the kinds of care that people need. So we are going to have to come up with models that kind of optimise that and really increase the chances of getting the care that and the support that people need. And you know, we are committed to doing that, and we have to make sure that that support's right. Because if it's not going to work for the individuals in terms of achieving their outcomes. It's not going to work for their families. It's not going to work for the council financially, and it's not going to work for local communities. So we absolutely do need to get those things right going forward.
Mr. Parton.
Thank you. With number 19 on page 70, resource implications. Do you currently, as things stand at the moment, how much of the figures have been calculated?
The outline business case that went to Cabinet outlined, I suppose, the kind of total investment, which was based on really based on the needs assessment, so the numbers of people that required what sorts of accommodation and how much it would cost to make that available. I think the figure was around about 200 million. What isn't yet determined is exactly where all that money comes from. So some of that money will come from developers, some of it will come from providers, some of it will come from the council. And I think exactly what that balance is will be determined by the nature of the partnerships that are developed in the financial model. But it'll be a long-term financial model that nobody here is going to be investing for a quick return. This is investment that's going to take place over 20 years, and we'll be looking at sustainable models, and the council will only be investing its own resources where it gets a return on that, which will be based on the factors of reducing demand, of managing costs, the costs of care, and on the return it receives in terms of rental income. So the council will be making investments, and those will be significant investments, but it'll only be part of that overall cost, and it will only be where the council has got a financial case for making those investments.
Mrs. Broadley.
Thank you, Chair. Just so I've got it right on what you were saying, obviously this is about investments and getting a return for the county council. And you've spoken about it might be county council land and somebody else doing the building, or vice versa. At what stage will you be looking at the care that could be provided? I understand that this is investment, but if you've got somebody that's got a parcel of land or wants to build on a parcel of county council land, doesn't have any care experience or whatever, but thinks, it might be a good investment to go into, so therefore a third provider would come in to do the care. What stage are you considering the actual care rather than just the investment? Because it's not just investment in the building, it's investment in the care for the future. And I just want to be certain what stage you're going to be looking at that to make sure that the care that we want for the people of Leicestershire is going to be there.
I think Richard's dying to answer your question.
Because it's a really, really, really good question, and the officers may have a better answer, but I'll have a go. Care always comes first. The number one thing that we do is to provide the care of the sufficient quality. But as you said in answering to Ted's question, through you, Chairman, there's a massive bill coming in terms of buildings. Now, we're not putting buildings first or returns first. It's easy to get distracted. But we realise if we don't solve that building problem, the ability to give care will be incredibly limited. So actually care will always come first, but this is actually just setting out the mechanism for how to bring in some more money, to leverage more money, so we can get the right buildings in the right place doing the right thing. We all know extra care is, we all know, we've got used to it now, but they're big, lumpy, expensive things. So if we can get money coming in to do those things for us, it is crucial at the end of it that the care is appropriate. And I think, Sandy may confirm, but we're not ignoring the care, but this paper is about looking at leveraging in new sources of money to get the buildings we need to deliver the care.
Thanks, Joe. I absolutely agree with what Richard said there. I think one of the issues we've got now, I think, is we're probably concerned that we're paying more than we need for the accommodation costs, and that limits to some extent what we can pay for care. So actually getting better value in terms for the council in paying for the accommodation costs, and some of those costs being met elsewhere, will mean that we have got more resource to invest in care and buying the quality of care that we need to. So absolutely, I mean, the end of the day, the support and care market is what our primary interest is, but we have to be in the business of making sure that accommodation is available for people and that it's at the right price in order for us to be able to deliver that quality of care.
Mrs. Broadie's come back and then Richard.
Thank you. I accept what you're saying and I understand why this is happening. But I would, and although it's an investment report, I would like to see some wording about the care in it as well, so that because it, on the face of it, it looks a little bit cold-hearted, if you like, because we're talking about adult social care, but we're talking about investments, and everybody knows that we do need the investments. But even just a paragraph to say that the care will be running alongside the investment would make it a bit more palatable, certainly to me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and then for pointing that out. It's completely obvious for you to say that, and exactly why scrutiny is always so good, because you point out the obvious thing that we haven't put in. I think the best simple example of the problem we're trying to solve is if somebody bids to provide care, they may bid for a 10-year period, they'll buy a building to provide that care and the service. They'll have to write off the cost of that 10 years of the building in 10 years, because that's the length of the contract, so they can't know any difference. So of course we effectively pay double the rate for a building that'll be perfectly good. We pay for it for 10 years, when actually it'll be there for 20 or 30. But the care part of it will still be the same amount, but we'll have overpaid for the building. And that's an example of how it's not working at the moment. But you're right, we need to make sure that it is obvious in the paper, that, and going forward as it will do, is that the principle is to support the quality of care, and that's why we're doing it.
Yes, just to add to that. So I think you're absolutely right to mention, and we will, when we bring the Cabinet report forward, ensure that we include something about the care provision. Essentially, it's a bit like the question about finances. There won't be a single answer. So in some cases, it will be the care providers themselves that are coming forward and asking us to work with them to develop a new accommodation-based care service. So the care provider will have themselves identified a need. They'll be seeking the council's support, and we may or may not agree with that. In other cases, a developer may come forward. They may already have a care provider that they work with regularly, and that they work together and they work together well, and there's some good evidence from other services that they provide that they're providing a good quality of care. So we just facilitate that process. It might be, I wouldn't discount at this point, we're not thinking about it, but I wouldn't discount the fact that the county council might provide the care if that meets the other strategic plans that we have. And of course we already have framework agreements in place with a number of providers to provide care across the county. So if we're bringing forward a scheme, it might be that we'll talk to our existing providers and ask them whether or not they will be interested in working with us to develop that. So it'll be, the business cases will be developed in different ways depending on each individual scheme, but we'll put that in the report.
Thank you for that. I think it's clear from the questions, or the sheer number of questions that have been asked by members, that this is an area we're quite excited about. I think we genuinely support, I believe, all of us, the Cabinet's decision to have a serious look at this. I think there's a one-off opportunity here to potentially get the right accommodation in the right places. We've seen across the districts that many of them are looking at larger developments which actually give the ability for extra care schemes or sheltered accommodation or accommodation for those with dementia or younger people with needed learning support. So I think we've got a one-off golden opportunity here for greater collaboration, and if ever there was a reason for Byron to break his borrowing rules, this might well be the right case. So I think there's a lot of support from this committee to the direction of travel that the county's going in, and I think it's probably clear that also we would want regular updates and the chance to carry on discussing it at this committee, because I think it's something clearly there's a lot of passion about in the room, and I think, you know, as Richard said, we want to ensure that we play our full part in helping to shape what's done going forward. So thank you for that, and we'll now move on to agenda item 10, which is the it sounds awful, doesn't it? The decommissioning of the Care Online service, but hopefully this will be slightly more positive. We've got Nigel Thomas, who's coming to present the report, but could I also ask Ian Retson and Miriam McKee, who I see are rushing up here. I'll give you time to sit down. We're not that mean. But they're also going to, I think Nigel's going first, and I think Ian and Miriam are then going to give us a view from Enrich, who've taken on providing quite a few of the services that we did formerly provide, which are now being moved across. So over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update to the committee on the decommissioning of the Care Online service, which took place in December last year. And you'll remember that the Care Online service was a service that provided training, ICT equipment and a telephone support service to enable people to use IT to increase their independence. And usually those people were those who had a disability or had limited conditions or long-term health conditions. The framework for the decision making behind the decommissioning of Care Online is outlined in paragraphs 2 to 4 of your report, and in summary, following a high-level review of the service, it was determined that to continue the service in its established form wasn't viable given the funding pressures facing the Communities and Wellbeing Service where it sat. And this was coupled with our awareness of a number of voluntary organisations who'd been identified that also offered support and help for people to use IT in their lives. Although we did acknowledge at the time that none of these offered an identical service to the one that was offered by Care Online, in combination that they did offer alternative ways for people to meet their digital support needs. The decision was a very hard one to take. People remember the discussion that we had at that time, given the valued work of the staff, and you requested that we come back to give an overview of what's happened since that time. So, in terms of that, paragraphs 10 to 13 of the report detail the results of a grant fund that we made available over 2 years, totalling £20,000 in total. And this was really there to mitigate that decommissioning and also to help organisations develop their offer to meet that gap that would be left by Care Online not being there. And the funding, following a process of looking at criteria associated with what the organisations wanted to use the money for, what their plans were, and how it best met those needs, it was decided to grant that to Enrich. And as you know, we've got Ian and Miriam here, who are trustees of Enrich, who've kindly agreed to come and tell you a little bit about that service. That service, I understand, was launched in February. And in addition has won substantial funding from the Bid Lottery Fund to sustain a service offering digital support to this target audience for at least 2 years. So in terms of that, paragraphs 18 and 19 details a number of actions that have ensured that service users have information about how they can continue to receive support for their digital and IT needs, should they choose to. And we feel that Enrich represented for us the closest match to Care Online as could be reasonably expected, and that is hopefully sustainable over the medium term. So I'm going to hand over to Ian and Miriam just to talk through what that service is.
Hello, I'm going to let Ian actually go through the service, but Enrich is a charity. We've been around for 33 years here in Leicestershire, and we have been supporting people with disabilities. We discovered that there was going to be a need with you decommissioning Care Online, and as a charity we actually went out and we put a bid together to the Big Lottery Fund. We have been awarded by the Big Lottery £300,000 to deliver a digital service within Leicestershire for the next 3 years. We have actually gone out and we recruited Ian, who actually was part of your team here in the County Council, onto our board as trustees, so that we had expertise on our board to get us going, to get the service up and running. We've also established a subgroup, which Ian is obviously key to within our charity, to actually ensure that this service gets delivered, it gets delivered well, and that going forward, that post the 3 years Big Lottery funding, we will still be providing digital services to the people of Leicestershire. And I'm going to hand over to Ian, who's going to go through exactly what we have done to date.
Right, thank you very much. And in summary, if I had to summarise this in one line or 30 seconds, it would be we've achieved a very smooth transition, a segue some might call it, from the County Council into the charitable sector. But I'll give you a little bit more detail of that, and just a reminder of the range of services. We've established a very similar digital engagement service covering the people of Leicestershire, particularly focusing on those with disabilities. It's very similar to Leicestershire Care Online in providing an assessment of needs, some equipment, particularly the specialist hardware and software for people, for instance, with learning disabilities or physical and sensory disabilities. We provide one-to-one home training and technical support, including a dedicated phone line. So in that respect, it's very similar to what was being provided. The future may look a bit different. There could be several differences emerge over time, but there is no certainty about this yet. Firstly, volunteers will be recruited and they will take some of the workload, so we can experience how that will work. There's a possible charges or donations because funding will always be key, particularly after the 3 years. But we're being proactive on that one. We're starting this year looking for alternative sources of funding for the future, one of which may be the self-funders in the community who need services that we can provide. Thirdly, Enrich covers Derbyshire and Leicestershire, but the lottery funding only covers Leicestershire, so initially we're staying within the county with that funding, but there's nothing to say that we can't replicate this service possibly in the city if there are resources, or in Derbyshire and Derby if that happens in the future. Fourthly, we want to set up group training so that can assist in care homes as one example. And fifthly, any of our clients will be able to have a look and take advantage of the additional services that Enrich provides with sporting activities for the disabled, etc. So those are some of the things that we think we can build on an existing service and make it better. I think there's been quite a good transition because firstly, the whole four members of the Care Online team were successfully recruited by Enrich, and I say with some modesty that I was recruited or persuaded to join Enrich as a trustee, which is quite an honour. I'm very pleased to do that, actually. And it's been exciting so far. The service was established February the 4th of this year. We cover all the range of disabilities. I've mentioned physical and sensory, but learning disability and mental health, as had been done previously, and possibly some of the frail elderly clients will be included. Just so you know that we have hit the ground running, in our first month we recruited 40 service users, and we had 30 service calls on our joint line. So I think that's a very positive start to it. And I think I should say thanks to Nigel and the rest of the team for helping us achieve that transition. It's been wonderful to see that people can come to us straight away. But the next point that I was asked to address was links with County Council services, and Colin Edis from Enrich has contacted all the locality managers in adult social care. We've already arranged about 6 meetings with either Colin or myself attending with team managers across the county, so we can inform them of the range of services we will be able to provide. So that's the positive view on it. I'd like to know a little bit more, please, if I may ask, how the information about Enrich Connect, as we are now called, has been transmitted through the council to its various sections, and whether the process has been fully established for handling enquiries so that they will be channelled into Enrich. There is one other area that we are not very successful in so far, and that is achieving contacts with the NHS and the clinical commissioning groups. We would dearly love some help in that area to have some new contacts through GP and health services so that we can make the general public aware of our services. And I hope that we can continue to receive laptops from ICT services, and they are currently charging us £20 each for something which has no value on the council's books. So I pose that partly as a question. Thank you very much, Mr.
Could I, on behalf of the committee, thank yourself, Ian and Miriam, for coming to give us the update today. Very good plug on the £20. I could see them writing down frantically, and I know Richard wants to step in. I'd just like to observe, and I don't normally go first as chairman, that two of the most difficult meetings I ever chaired, not because the people were disruptive or rude or anything, but just because of how emotional it was the sheer number of people that took the time to explain to us what the service meant to them. And I think it would be remiss, therefore, me as chairman of this group, not to thank Richard and his cabinet colleagues for listening, for providing some funding to allow the transition, and for working with someone like yourselves to take the place of a service which we all very much valued for our residents. And before I let members come in, I think it would only be right to let the officers and Richard answer the questions that you've posed, Ian.
Chairman, I first of all, through you, want to welcome in Rich here. It was the toughest. Anybody who was on the committee when we covered it, it was one of the toughest ones, along with maybe trees. But it was very difficult, and those members who were here had to sort of take on faith that we would use our best endeavours to get a replacement service, because in Rich, as you can see here now, we're looking for community funding for National Lottery. So they couldn't slip in and take over. So we got to a position where I promised the committee I use my best endeavours to try and get a follow-on service, which we hoped would be in Rich and has proved to be there. So I'm certainly very pleased to thank them, and also particularly Nigel, because I go and push him at the next meeting, a next lead member meeting, and say, Nigel, what are we doing to get this across the line, which he's delivered, which Enrich have acknowledged. I'll let him answer the difficult questions on computers.
Thanks, Richard. Just in terms of some of the queries that Ian's raised, in terms of now that sort of Enrich has been established and operating for a number of weeks now, we've been working closely with things like our customer service centre and our first contact teams, and now that we know that sort of Enrich is established and worked through, we'll continue to sort of guide them so that when they're dealing with clients and referrals, they know the types of services that Enrich can provide. As I've said in my introduction, paragraphs 18 and 19 just outline for the committee, the things that we'd done whilst we were preparing for the decommissioning of the service. In terms of the computers, what we did do with those service users that had equipment ready, as part of sort of helping them and the training that was going on through Care Online, we enabled them to keep that equipment. As Ian says, this is sort of recycled IT equipment. Obviously, we'd have to explore, and happy to sort of have further conversations about the cost element of that. So hopefully that answers the queries.
Thank you for that, Nigel. I think there was almost a commitment there not to charge £20 going forward, but I'm sure the cabinet portfolio holder will bear this in mind and keep you on your toes. I think the one bit you missed from what Ian asked was contact with the NHS and the CCGs, and I'm sure one or either of you, with your knowledge of the NHS, will pick up that. John?
Yeah, I'll try. It does, I agree, seem a bit circular that we're giving X £1,000 to Enrich Connect every year for them to be charged then back to us for the £20 for it's something not quite right with that whole transfer, isn't there? In terms of the NHS, I think we can work with colleagues, and I'll raise this with colleagues. Certainly within the council, this leaflet has been circulated, and we have asked managers to make contact with Colin or with colleagues, with Ian or with other colleagues. And as Ian said, we've got a number of meetings already in place to try to do that. I can also circulate this with NHS colleagues. I've got an electronic copy. We are working, as you know, quite closely now to develop neighbourhood teams based around primary care. One of the things that we're doing within that process is a process we call asset mapping. So looking at each local area, so this is sort of 30,000 population areas, looking at what's available within those areas to support people, and certainly within that asset mapping we can ensure that we've got the Enrich Connect offer built into that asset mapping at that level, because that way it's not just about social care, it's about primary care, GPs, district nurses and others all having the awareness. So we'll build that into that process.
Thank you, John. I think you're getting closer to not paying the £20, Ian, as everybody speaks. So, Mrs. Page.
Thank you, Chairman. A lot has been said, but I think I ought to add my congratulations and my thanks, because I think it is, something really fantastic, especially on the face of how emotive so many users are. And I've only got a couple of points. One, it is in relation to the contact with the NHS, being mindful of the next report we've got. Maybe it can be arranged that Enrich can give a presentation to the Adult Safeguarding Board or the Health and Wellbeing Board, because that is where all our GP connect, and that is from where it can be disseminated. We also have a service level agreement with VASL, and there maybe can be a connection made there, because I think that is really, really important, because, for instance, being a district councillor at the Harbour district, I know that VASL delivers quite a lot of services, Befrienders, etc., and that is again a way to get out into the communities. And that is my first question. You said you have recruited 40 people, but how do you actually market yourself to the parish councils to get there at the grassroots level? So that's my question. And my other point, it's also again one of just, for whatever it's worth, some advice to approach the individual district councils. I know that we at Harbour have got a community fund, and if you can demonstrate that there's match funding and that you are doing something to deliver to our community, you can attract some funding from there. and I know it's very small, but for instance in Lutterworth, if you provide something to the services there, you can get a small grant from the town council. So I think it is maybe looking at the individual districts. So my question is just simply, how do you market yourself? And thank you again.
Right, I will pick that one up. Well, Enrich has been around for 33 years in Leicestershire. We were set up by Sue Ryder and Leonard Cheshire, which is why you've got the RYCH in the name. We do market ourselves, but we probably, and traditionally, we have never marketed ourselves to borough districts or even to county councils in any big way. We have three elements too. Some 7 years ago, we set up Enrich Assist, which is now a £750 million business, and we actually supply services to you at the county council. But that is a completely separate business and completely ring-fenced. We've always had the charity side, and in our charity side, which is the volunteer side, we actually touch about 300 to 400 people every year, providing them with a whole variety of support. Many of the referrals actually come to us through the county council already, but traditionally we never had any money from any of the county councils. We have actually always gone out and fundraised with a whole variety of funders, many of whom have supported us for best part of 30 years. And we do that on a very small budget and always have done. We saw a niche coming up because we already did provide support for odd individuals who needed and wanted somebody to help them with computers. The thing about Enrich is we provide support to people with disability to do things and access services they couldn't otherwise do. So we don't just have one product. We try and find a volunteer who meets the needs of our client. So that could be somebody with very good computer skills to get somebody computer literate. It could be somebody who has got very good literacy skills to help somebody write a book. It could just be somebody who goes and visits somebody and helps them cook once a week. The range of support we give is incredibly varied. We also run things like we run a forum for our clients so that they can come and talk in a place about their disability. And again, sometimes we have county council people come along and partake in that. But we also run a bocce club with Leicester City Football Club, which has been incredibly successful. We do painting, we do singing, we do all kinds of things. So we also provide a whole social activity. Traditionally, we have never ever really done any contact with the districts and boroughs, and it is probably something that we do going forward need to do, because this is going to give us a slightly bigger reach than we've perhaps had in the past.
If I just
Ian's keen to get in first.
I know.
You want to do a
referrals,
referral and then we go back to Ian?
Yes, referrals. I understand now. You're coming from referrals point of view rather than approaching the individual and all that. Before you answer me, I think it might be then well worth to looking at the befrienders and whatever, because they're going into the houses and they see what is required.
If I might, thank you, Chairman. Just to be specific about the Enrich Connect, I nearly said Leicestershire Care Online then. The Connect team have a very large network of people, because one of the significant things we did in this transfer of staff and experience is to bring over 55 years of experience across the whole team. So I think that's a significant part. There are 1,000 people, 2,000 people out there who know about us already, and we do actually have a good user base from the past established in Harborough District, because that's where we started in 2001. So we have a point. Thank you very much. I've made a note of that community funding one. So I think that's the starting point. Some of the people who've come to us since we've been Enrich Connect are old clients who we may not have seen for several years, and they now find they're in a different situation. They want some help or a refresher, so they've rung us up and asked for some help. So that's great. Thank you.
I don't think there are any further questions. Could I just have a request to Nigel that could I suggest that the leaflet, as John's got an electronic copy, goes to every county councillor, so they're aware for their divisions that they can refer people to yourself across Leicestershire, which will be brilliant. And could I thank you for actually probably bringing the happiest report that I've received in my time as chairman, and to thank you, and could you pass on our thanks to your wider team for everything they're doing in this area. So thank you to from all of us to Miriam and Ian, and Nigel, just for introducing you. Could I just suggest that whilst James is making his way to the table, we've been going a fair length of time, I know people might need it, should we just take a 2-minute break in case people need to get a drink or use the facilities? People were looking at me somewhat stressed. So if we're back in 2 or 3 minutes, we'll start again. If I could ask people to make their way back as soon as possible, I'd be grateful. Thank you. All right, thank you all. We're now moving on to agenda item 11, which is the Leicestershire and Rutland Safeguarding Adults Board Development Plan 2019-20, which is in the hands of James Fox, who's Safeguarding Board Business Manager. As members will remember and mentioned in item 6 on the report, is that Robert Lake, who was the independent chairman, stood down for health reasons. And I understand from talking to John earlier that we hope to have a new chair in place April, May time, or thereabouts, just to give you an update. And so I therefore thank James for coming and pass over to him.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, apologies you haven't got the independent chairs. We don't have one at the moment. You have before you the draft of the development plan for the Leicestershire Rutland Safeguarding Adults Board for the coming year, for 2019 and 20. And as in previous years, this has been developed through our partners coming together, identifying some of the key issues facing safeguarding adults, areas we feel that we need to do some assurance work or pull together some development work to consider the key concerns and look at how we can take forward safeguarding adults into the coming year. The paper at point 10 outlines the proposed development plan priorities for the year. One around ensuring we have effective multi-agency meetings, a priority around mental capacity, being assured that people without capacity consent are being safeguarded in current practice and also with the introduction of liberty protection safeguards. Third priority around improving the recognition and coordinated partnership response to adult exploitation. And then fourth around safeguarding and transition, so with regards to young people, moving from young people's services to ensure that the work there that is being done does prevent safeguarding needs going forward in the future. And some of the detail on those is outlined in the appended plan, and the focus on those work on that work is outlined in that appended plan there. As the paper outlines, two of these priorities, the first and fourth priorities, we are looking to explore them specifically as joint priorities with the Leicester Safeguarding Adults Board that we have been working more closely with over the last few years. And actually all of the work of the board will probably have some joint elements of it in our work across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland with the board there as well. So this is presented to this committee to consider the plan and make any comments or any points that the committee would like to make to be taken into account as this is taken forward. This is, as outlined, it is a draft plan. It's still in development and will be finally agreed at the Safeguarding Adults Board, which will take place at the end of April this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. Ms Newton.
Thank you very much, Chair. Many young adults are exploited, but it's often hidden. They're too ashamed probably to come forward and say there's even a group of friends exploiting them, whatever. What can be done about those young vulnerable adults who are experiencing exploitation but find it difficult to actually come forward and seek help? I know of this because I know I very recently I've had to deal with a case like this.
I think you're right. It is difficult because of the shame people can feel about what they've allowed to happen to them, particularly when we're talking about some of these cases where there's some very serious exploitation going on. I think some of that is what we'll be exploring this year and looking to develop. I think a key thing is awareness in the community at large of looking at how people can be aware of some of the signs, some of the things that might be going on, and practitioners as well, working for services across services that might come into contact with people to identify some of the signs. It is a very difficult thing, and that's certainly something we'll be developing as part of this development work. That's one of the real key focuses of that element of work, is that looking at how we reach out to people who generally they can be quite hidden and quite isolated. I think it's quite difficult, and certainly looking at how we work with community organisations. We've done a bit of work around prevention the last couple of years, looking at organisations and community organisations that are in touch with people more broadly, and how we can link in with them will be really important.
What I'm thinking about, I think when people actually reach out, there's an acknowledgement that there's an issue and a problem. But many young adults...
Sorry, Betty, could I just ask you to bring the mic closer? I'm just
Okay,
aware of
can you?
people
Sorry,
might
it's
be
me.
watching on the web.
Is
you know,
that
to hear.
okay?
That's brilliant, thank you.
For me, the issue is there's many young adults out there that are experiencing exploitation, are quite ashamed of it, but are not coming forward and asking and seeking help. How do we reach those young vulnerable adults who are really ashamed of what is happening to them and won't talk about it? I think it's that hidden group and with their vulnerabilities that concerns me a lot. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I think that's it. Something that's not an easy answer. I don't have an answer for that now, but I think that was with working with our partners, that will be key. I think ensuring people are aware of what some of the issues are, but also encouraging them around the support that's available and the help that's available, and how that will be responded to will be important as part of our response. So.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, James. To me, safeguarding and all the connotations thereof is based on a good communication protocol and good communication between all of the partners. So can you assure me or tell me how this, if you have got a communications protocol as part of this, how is it effective? And one of my bugbears are all the computers and the communication lines competitive, whatever, compatible, that's the word I was looking for. And so that's my question, and my plea is, if and when we have a new chair of the board, could we ensure that he comes to the county council and probably or he or she introduces themselves and talk through the plan and their aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so in short, yes, we have a multi-agency procedures as part of the Safeguarding Adults Board that outline how partners should work together, how they should be communicating, and as part of our processes, as part of the Safeguarding Adults Board, we have quality assurance processes that then tests and checks that. So we carry out at least 2 multi-agency audits each year, which look across a number of cases, look into those cases, and look at how well agencies have communicated, how well they've shared information, how well they've worked together, the plans they've put in place, and what the outcomes have been around those. And that information gets detailed in terms of our quality assurance work in our annual report, which we produce at the end of each financial year, and we usually present that to this committee, so that will outline some of the assurance work we've done to identify actually how well agencies are working together, because that is a key role of the Safeguarding Adults Board as well, to carry out that assurance as to how agencies are working together. So certainly at the moment, the work we've carried out this year, the quality assurance, is telling us that agencies generally are working together well around that. The first priority in our plan is looking at providing a ensuring the framework for how agencies work together is clearer, so looking at where we can improve things. And I think particularly where we're talking about adults where someone might have a concern, but they wouldn't fit within our process for safeguarding, that will provide another route to be able to provide support and work together effectively with them. With regards to computer systems, I think we have people work together and communicate well. I think at the moment our computer systems link maybe is where they need to. That there's possibly improvement there, but I think things like that are always changing, and that would be something to consider for individual agencies.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask around kind of how you're judging the public experience of safeguarding. I can kind of share offline a number of people's experiences that was less than positive, but kind of given the nature that safeguarding, there's a lot of kind of things that would warrant a safeguarding thing. It's just about how you then kind of rating yourself or making sure that it's the best experience that people can get, really.
Thank you. We have it can be. We've done some work around engagement. I think one of the things we find very difficult is where people have gone through the safeguarding process, going back to get some information from them about how they found it can be quite difficult because of how I guess it's generally been a difficult situation they've gone through, and whether they want to relive that. I think it's something that we do need to develop our work on a bit more and understand a bit better. We have done some survey work in the past. So this year we're just collating the findings. We've gone out again. It's gone out through practitioners to get some views of people around the services that provide to the safeguarding process they've been through and the services that are provided to them. Something the board does monitor is a survey that's carried out by the local authority that gets people's feedback on whether they feel safe and whether services they're working with them are supported to feel safe. So that's service users, adults with care and support needs, that we're getting that back. I think something we've done some work with the general public, and I think within that we found when you go to the general public, there's not a great awareness of what safeguarding adults is and understanding of it. And I think it's when people are touched by the services. But I think that's something we're always looking to support and develop. But I think we perhaps haven't got there and perhaps need to do a bit more work around that. So.
Thank you, Chair. And as has been in the past, James, we've spoken before, if we can help and support with that. I think there's quite a fundamental role that Healthwatch can play with kind of helping people appreciate and understand safeguarding, because I absolutely agree with you. If you talk to a lot of the public about what safeguarding is, they've got no appreciation of it in the context of keeping people safe.
Mrs. Wright.
My question really follows on exactly. You've led me beautifully into that, because with the plans to replace dolls with the liberty protection safeguards, can we use it as an opportunity to communicate what it actually means to members of the public in a crystal clear language? Because dolls, it's very frightening if people go into a care home and then you get a doll's order placed on you. What's happening, you know, and loved ones just don't understand it. It's very complex. It's a very emotional time, and I think we just need some crystal clear language around something like that to take away the fears that go with it.
Yes, thank you. And I think we've recognised that the introduction of liberty protection safeguards is something that will be quite very significant and something that we will want to do some work around locally, and that's something we can certainly take on board within the work that's done there to ensure that people have the information they need in a way they can understand, and that does really clearly communicate what it's about, and it is about safeguarding them. Thank you.
Mr. Parton.
I appreciate that this doesn't actually, as you've stated, doesn't actually have to officially appear at this committee. So I suppose in some respects there's not a need to really answer some questions, but I'm playing advocate here as a critical friend. Where it says the future improvement priorities identified in the annual report 17-18 have been built in to develop plans for 19-20. What happened in 1819? What was that year used for?
Sorry, that's just to clarify. So the annual report for 1819 hasn't been written yet, so that's why. So our annual report for 1718 was published in September, so that will have identified some things. As we're going throughout the year, we also any things that are coming up during the year are pulled out and identified into this, and that's picked up really in terms of the point 7D in the report that talks about the evaluation of the development plans for 2018-19. So I think it is. It's just the nature of the timing of when annual reports are produced, but just to, I guess, assure the panel that we are we're not ignoring everything that's gone past in the last year when we're developing our priorities. We take into account what we've identified in our annual report, which would be published in September last year, and the work that has been continuing on since then as well.
Being relatively new to this committee, so the Care Act was formed in 2014. When did this committee very first sit for the first time?
The Safeguarding Adults Board was in existence prior to the Care Act. We had an arrangement linked to the linked to the Safeguarding Children's Board, and so we had a joint Safeguarding Children's Board and Safeguarding Adults Board since 2012 was when that started. So that's been in place since then. Since 2014 and 15, it's been reviewed and put on a statutory footing, so that has changed a little bit how the board's worked and the basis behind that. But the board's been around in existence for 6 years, 7 years now.
So, if there's a member of the public looking at this, I'd look at the, for example, say, priority SAB1, and it gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rationales, and there's 1 or 2 things that talk about lack of formal structure, lack of awareness, lack of clear structure. How, given that, it's not been meeting for that long, and I appreciate at the moment you haven't even got a chair for health reasons, but how is this? Would this be normal to have this many points of action where you've got a need for improvement?
I think the Safeguarding Adult Board's always looking at areas it can improve and where it can improve. That first priority is particularly, it's looking at things that actually the Safeguarding Adults Board perhaps wouldn't have looked at initially, because they are areas of work that wouldn't normally be considered within the safeguarding remit. So within the safeguarding processes, where you've got a specific criteria of adults with care and support needs that are in need are at a level of risk of harm to themselves, or the level of risk of harm from someone or someone else. We've set up and have fairly good structures in place for a number of years around safeguarding those people. I think this is identifying that we want to do something earlier. So and actually we don't necessarily have the framework where we identify there's a level of risk or a level of concern. People want to put in some support, want to work together to support someone and prevent further safeguarding need and further issues. And this is trying to provide, it's identifying that we don't have a clear structure for that. And so that's something that we want to do to improve our prevention work around safeguarding. So I think it's, in terms of normal to have areas of improvement, I think we're always looking for areas of improvement. I think it's an area that we've been developing our awareness of a board in terms of preventing safeguarding over the last couple of years. So I think it's moving on from work that we've been identifying over the last couple of years.
I'll sneak in with the last question then, and it really is following on from Ted's on SAB1. I think I've now seen 3 or 4 of these reports. I appreciate the first one was a joint one with children and adults, but I think each one has talked about effective meetings. I think the first 2 actually had a list of people who didn't bother to attend and why they weren't attending, etc. So if we're looking at effective multi-agency meetings, the targets didn't actually seem to measure effectiveness. They just seem to measure your meeting. So you can have meetings for meeting's sake or meetings that do something. So I would have expected the criteria to actually say that, you know, these people must attend. The people attending must be decision makers. There must be a clear structure. They don't need to revert back to the centre to get a decision. Because I know that certainly with NHS partners, it's one of their great claims to fame that they forget to send decision makers and they always revert to the, I need to go back and ask someone higher. So how do we make sure that it's an effective meeting by getting the right people there and they can make decisions? And how do we measure that? Because it doesn't seem to be covered in SAB1.
I think certainly the work to put a framework in place will identify as well is who are the right people to involve in those and who needs to be involved in those meetings. I think in terms of the board and decision making at the board, that's something we do look at in our annual report. I think it's effectiveness is something that can be difficult to measure in terms of how we in terms of numbers, but I think what we do look at is assessing what is the work the board's been put in place, getting the feedback from people around that are from our safeguarding processes. Are people being asked the right questions in safeguarding processes, which I guess identifies if the work that we're doing on a process basis then being cascaded into organisations. I think there's our quality assurance looks at some of that as well, so it looks at outcomes for people, and we'll look at we'll do specific things around, are the right people in place who can make decisions, are plans being progressed appropriately as they drift and delay in plans because the right people aren't there. So we have a few ways of looking at that, but that's certainly something we can continue to explore and ensure we've got good approaches in place to make sure we are effective.
Right, again, on behalf of all of us, James, can I thank you for coming to present the report. I think you've guessed that people are interested in it via the questions they've asked. And we're now moving on to the final item on today's agenda, which is the Collections and Learning Hub and Museum Service Collections. So I invite Nigel Thomas and Fran Wills to come to the table, to the hot seats. Before we kick off as well, I know that following the last planning meeting, we arranged for all members to have the opportunity to visit the Collections Hub. And could I, on behalf of Hilary and myself, I know we were the only 2 that were able to attend, thank you, Fran, and also can you pass on our great thanks to Alison for a wonderful and informative visit. I think you know from the questions that we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves, and I would urge all councillors that haven't been to go, and I'd also urge you to consider actually making, as part of new members' inductions to when we get new county councillors, that a visit to that hub is arranged for all new councillors as they come within the early days of them becoming the councillors, because I for one would have benefited having gone earlier. So I admit that's down to me. I should have arranged it earlier, but I just wonder if we can take it to the members' induction pack and consider it there. But over to whoever wants to go first.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off, and Fran will help in terms of any questions that you may have. So the purpose of the report is just to update you on the proposals to develop a collections and learning hub here on the County Hall campus, and also to include an update on the management, maintenance and governance of the museum service. For illustrative purposes, and we'll take your advice as to how much of these you want to see, we've got a short design animation which gives an artist's impression of what the new record office element of the hub would look like. And we've also got a clip later on about, which is illustrative really, of the types of work that the museum service does. It illustrates it far better than I could do just talking to you about it. So just to briefly introduce the services that we're talking about here. The Record Office, as you'll know, is the archive of the county, city and Rutland. It is a partnership. It's a statutory function to keep and make accessible the public record of Leicestershire through documents that tell that story, whether they're letters, historical maps, records of meetings, or we have a requirement to hold any deposits of any Leicestershire organisation or any organisation that has strong links with Leicestershire in terms of their record, because collectively it tells that story. The museum service cares for and interprets the artefacts that tell that story, and whether that be through costume, toys, science, archaeology, whatever. And we make the collections accessible via 5 accredited museums, and they're detailed in paragraph 9 of your report. But we also offer loans, exhibitions and display work, and do a lot of work with community groups. Some of that will be illustrated by the clip if we get a chance to show that. And all aspects of those collections are accessible by request, and that's detailed in paragraph 11. And in addition, we'll mention, because it is part of the development, the Creative Learning Service, which is a specialist provision for schools, and provides schools that subscribe to the service or buy in specific provision to help develop develop high quality cultural resources within part of the work for the curriculum. And that also involves training, inset training with teachers to help them make the best use of those resources. So just moving on to the Collections Hub, your report outlines the background of the development of the business case to develop the hub, and that was really to do 2 things. One was to accommodate the immediate record office expansion requirement for the next 25 years. Where we are at the moment isn't big enough. We need the room, the space to accommodate stuff that comes in the future. And secondly, reduce the number of locations operated that house the collections of the museum's service, which are in the detailed in the report. Since the Cabinet approved the development of the hub on this campus, further work has been undertaken on a revised option which delivers the requirements at a lower capital requirement while still being located on the campus. And this is detailed in paragraphs 12 to 16 of the report. And in summary, this comprises of 2 phases. The first one focuses on the requirements of the Record Office in providing reception and office space in the front of the main County Hall building, and to provide a new purpose-built strong room on an adjacent plot of land. And you'll appreciate that those records and documents have to be kept at certain temperatures in certain conditions in order for us to preserve and keep them. And the second phase would concentrate on bringing together the collections of the museum service and the creative learning services and enable their current housing locations to be closed through a refurbishment of the Eastern Annex. This 2-phase proposal is estimated to cost approximately 10 million for the new record office in terms of capital investment, with costs of the new museum's collections and the site for the collections, a refurbishment of the Eastern Annex, currently in the region of 3 million, depending on the scope of the proposal, and also it's subject to a full business case as well. And you'll recall that in the original report and the business case, we were looking at capital investment of up to 35 million and 16 million. It illustrates that this would provide the same type of service but at a lower capital cost. We've got an opportunity to actually show a clip if you want in terms of the record office and what this is an artist's impression of what that might look like. And if you picture it, if you face County Hall from the roadside, if you look to the right, that's sort of where you're going to look at now.
We've been fully briefed, Nigel.
Oh, right,
and
okay.
We're going for both this and the video later.
Brilliant.
I thought you were going to take us indoors. Hold on 1 second. Is your question about that, or you got a question later? Do you want to ask yours now? Right. So we'll come back to you in a minute, and we'll go to Hilary, who wants to ask a question about the
Thank
picture.
you. About the picture, just so that I can be absolutely certain, is so the big end block was the end of County Hall, but then there's that bit where we stand under for Remembrance Day that faces the... So is this in the back of, front of that part?
If you were to walk away from that building, you'd be looking at the dual carriageway and the grass that goes up to it. If you look at earlier on, if you looked at the little half circles on the top left, that's the edge of sort of part of the County Hall building. So this bit would be the sort of new entry foyer, and then the purpose-built sort of strong room is the bigger block that's on the right.
Are you carrying on, or...?
Yes, I'll just finish off just by way of introduction. So, moving on then to the museum's collections part of the report. The purpose, work and governance surrounding the museum's collections is detailed in paragraph 19, odd ones. There's a few things just in terms of taking you through that. Appendix A just details the museum's collections development policy, and that gives an overview of each of the areas where we collect materials and shows what we do about acquiring, rationalising and disposing of any elements of those collections. Paragraphs 27 and 29 of your report covers the public access of the collections. Paragraph 30 gives examples of where we loan items to other bodies, a part of the work that they're doing, sometimes around the country. Paragraph 31 gives you what we're currently doing in terms of our digital presence through social media and other means. Paragraphs 32 to 4 details some of the outreach and participation work, which we do a lot of work in terms of taking those collections out to local communities, because not every community's got a local community museum, and working with communities there. And paragraphs 35 to 38 details the work of arts in the Arts in Schools project. So just by way of illustrating that, we thought we'd show a couple of minutes of something that you can, the link is in your report. You may not get an opportunity to see the whole of this, but do go and have a look if you've not had a chance. This gives you an example of some of the types of work that we do.
I briefed them all, it was going to be 20 minutes. Just before you start, can I just get one clarification on Appendix A, which is page 106382, the Century Theatre. I have a recollection at last meeting, or the meeting before, we voted to remove it from the museum's collection, so I presume it shouldn't be listed on there.
That's the current document. It's under review at the moment, so yes, you're right, it will be modernised to take that out. Yeah.
years ago, World War I changed people's lives forever. The world was never the same again. Together, you've all brought it back to life, and together you've honoured the many men, women and children that gave their lives then for the benefit of ours today. In November, we commemorated the end of fighting 100 years ago, and Century of Stories, together with the people of Leicestershire, have discovered their unique and amazing connections to World War I. We want to share those connections with you today.
Century of Stories has reached out to communities who wouldn't traditionally engage in heritage. People involved in researching and sharing their connection have been from all walks of life, often working together in partnership for the very first time. Independent museums and heritage organisations, offenders, children and adults with disabilities, schools, colleges and universities, youth groups, sports clubs, and of course the hundreds of individuals on their own personal journeys.
Today is a very special day because we have a wonderful event. This is bringing together all of our hard work around the Bosworth Tommies and our story. We have got dignitaries from the council coming along, we've got family and friends, and they're all going to come and celebrate this exhibition. It has been 4 years in the making and we've all worked really hard. I can't believe that 4 years has gone, and the learners have produced a wonderful story that has involved all of the history topics that we have been doing. So it's actually brought our history to life.
What a journey from start to end. We had ups and downs, we had laughs, we had cries, we had some good ideas, we had some crazy ideas, we had some insane ideas. I never thought I would do something like this. It has been one of the best things that I've ever done in my life. What made this project so special is our friendship, our bond that was key. Without it, we will have never have met, and our friendship or project would have never have happened.
This group of learners started here as a history group, and then it just led one thing to another, and the things they've created, and it's come from them as well. They've started doing things in the summer holiday by themselves. They've done things at home. They've come with ideas. They're buzzing about it. This was the only group originally 7 years ago, and now I think we've got 7 groups across the county. So that's massive, and also empowering for other tutors that are able to hear about this and think, I want to get in that, I want to try it, and giving them the confidence, and also enabling people to go and try other things as well that they wouldn't have done.
We are the Bosworth Tommies!
In the Heritage Lottery Fund, we're always trying to reach out to difficult audiences, and learning disabilities is a really difficult audience to engage in heritage, but when you can engage them, it works out brilliantly. And that's what's gone on here today. You've seen a bunch of people with learning disabilities who've been able to use their contacts, their research, their activity within the heritage that they have, everybody has, in order to really develop as people. And that's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so these events are fantastic because you get to meet a lot of people that are like-minded, who are doing the same thing that you are, tracing family members. You, of course, through the networking, you can find different routes to go through, get advice, and then also it's really interesting to see other people's stories as well, because the chances are, and quite often is the case, that those family members are in the same regiment, in the same platoon even as your relative. So you are really sharing a story with everybody else within Leicestershire. So it's fantastic.
It's so wonderful to see so many people here in Anstey Library. We've started this with Century of Stories back in September. We got local groups together, and from that we invited people in, see if they had family members on the memorial, but we also wanted to find out about people who survived the First World War, what they did afterwards, how it affected them, and also how the village survived during the First World War and what went on.
we didn't know how many people would turn up to the community day, and we had never tried to reach these people before. We didn't know what the uptake would be, and we thought maybe 2 or 3 people an hour throughout the day, but we had over 100 people. The place was buzzing, it was full, and at one point we paused and went, just hear that chatter, that constant chatter that's not stopping, that's people connecting, and it became a reunion. There were people who travelled from Northampton who used to live here, and there was that sound of, oh, I remember you, and that's what we're trying to keep going now.
Let me get this right. So you never knew each other. No. And you both come here today and you realise that you've got something in common. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, it turns out that we have my great-great-grandfather is our common ancestor. Yeah. That's right, William Palmer, isn't it?
Yeah. And you've never met each other before?
No. Yeah, well, it's fantastic. And I was just looking at the photographs over there and noticed this name that was familiar to me from my family tree, and I was taking a picture of it, and somebody said, oh, I'll photocopy it for you, and then she says, oh, you might know so-and-so, who's Janet, who's here, who I'd never, she must be related to you. Yeah. How fantastic's that? Yeah, it was really great.
The joy of Century of Stories is that it's never been a prescriptive project. We've worked with sensitivity, creativity and passion to find the best method for people to explore their connections to World War I. Leicestershire Heritage Community truly came together and worked in partnership to enable Century of Stories to offer the right support to achieve the right outcomes.
Well, we're having a great time today. We're having a lot of fun. We're playing host to 75 children from a South Wigston school, and it's very nice to welcome young children really to the record office, because we don't often get small children in, and we're very Jesuitical here about that. You know, we'd like to get them young and convince them that how important archives are and how relevant archives are to them. You know, it's not fuddy-duddy old stuff for elderly people tracing their family tree and things like that. It's relevant to everybody. So, you know, it's a delight to take them out to our reconstructed trench and to show them, give them a sort of an insight how trench warfare worked, the problems of messages going, astray and all that sort of thing, and play at firing a mortar, so we were pinpointing targets on a map and sending runners here, there and everywhere, and stretcher bearers when they got wounded. You know, so we're having a lot of fun, but we're learning at the same time.
Hello, are you there? We're looking at World War I and what the soldiers were doing. We're doing a history of World War I, and Centuries of Stories asked us if we wanted to come to the records office to engage the children and to look at anything that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do in school. And they're also having a tour around the records office, so they're looking at how pieces of paper are conserved and how we look after records that are hundreds of years old, which is brilliant because they would never have that opportunity at school. The children are really enjoying it. They really like the World War I topic, and we've done some poems and they're finding it really interesting.
We've come from school to the records office today, and we're learning about the World War I. I'm filling in my soldier small book to give all my information about the World War, and I'm pretending I'm a soldier in the war.
Unless you're a heritage enthusiast, you're not going to wake up in the morning and say, oh, I want to learn about heritage today. But Century of Stories has used World War I as a catalyst to help engage communities, individuals and groups to set their own agenda and achieve their own personal goals.
Dear Mum and Dad, I hope you're feeling well and not worrying about me, because I am alright. The trenches are ever so smelly that they have all kinds of stuff like rats. Seen you in 4 years, which is very sad.
This is our heritage. This is what our forefathers contributed, and the fact that, in a sense, the Sikh contribution for many years has been hidden. I mean, certainly when I was at school, I had no idea that our own background, our culture, had such a contribution to, make to the war, and I think the children have learnt that.
One of the greatest things about this project is it's given the opportunity for our students to learn about their link to World War I. Their link from a religious point of view, but also from their background and their family backgrounds. But for the children, it's also going to be a great opportunity, and myself, to learn about how the different faiths are connected to World War I. So what is the Hindu link to World War I? What is the Sikh link to World War I? What is the Catholic link to World War I? And also then we can share our link to World War I.
I suppose what's important about this project and what's significant is that Leicester's such a culturally diverse area, and the fact that it's been carried out in a number of different settings and with a number of different faiths, and that shows a great unity within the message and actually shows similarities between faiths.
I guess the important lesson and what this Century of Stories is allowing us to do is, looking forward, we need to collaborate, work together, and the opportunity to work with Krishna Avanti, Madani, St John's means that we are now, the future is about collaborating and working together, and I think this project has created so many opportunities to do that.
Thank you for the opportunity this project has given us. It's allowed us 4 schools to work collaboratively on a project, to work together, to work collectively on something, to really show our connection.
Sharing the research, outcomes and stories from each individual participant or group has been uplifting and at times very moving. It has shown us the huge impact of personal journeys, but also of group connections and communications. We've used a variety of methods to share our stories, including 70 drop-in sessions and research-based history cafes attended by over 900 people, 70 unique events in museums, libraries and cultural and community venues, community sharing days across the county with over 700 participants and over 50 unique commemoration projects with over 70 partners. We've also used Facebook, Twitter, exhibitions, history cafes, sharing our films on social media, History Pin and Pinterest to share all our stories.
All of us have ambitions and goals in life. It could be companionship, it could be looking after your health and well-being, it could be finding personal connections, or it could just be a qualification. What Century of Stories did was turn the camera around 180 degrees and look at people and say, what do you want to achieve? And through our bespoke projects, we've helped people achieve those ambitions.
I've got a photo here with my father on after the war. I don't know how I know it's my dad, but it is. Somebody must have told me. It must have been in a different book. But I must know a lot of people on this, but I don't know them because they're, well, my dad he died when he was 52, so he's been dead a long while. So I just wanted to come down and know more about his life, really, in the army or wherever. I don't usually come out on a Wednesday, but because I've had a pacemaker and they're still out of breath. They're very friendly people and I've met friends, so it's brilliant.
While I was doing my project, I got my dad to ask my nan if I could go around my grandma's, which was a lot of effort because I don't normally go around my grandma's, and my grandma had loads of birth certificates and some of them even lead into past the 1900s.
I was Rose Queen, and I do have a picture with the Reverend Francis Michael Ambrose Bain. Yeah, I think it's important that people do come here and tell their stories before people forget. So it's sort of a come-together meeting, if you like.
Okay, I'm Robin Jenkins. I'm Senior Archivist responsible for collections at the Record Office at Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland, and I'm chairing the conference today. And it is a conference really arranged, called by the Century of Stories project, which is a lottery-funded project run by Leicestershire County Council, really to gather together all the groups who are involved in commemoration of the First World War and to produce something memorable and important and relevant to them about that great conflict and what it means to us today. And this is the academic element, and it's an academic conference which brings together speakers from all sorts of fields and places on all sorts of topics, and an audience that's equally diverse. You know, it's very pleasing that it is. And the good thing about it is that it's reaching into all sorts of corners that we haven't explored before, or it's opening up all sorts of questions and interesting angles on the Great War and its remembrance, and bringing in all sorts of comments and conversations, really, in a very pleasant, affable, but also academic way.
Century of Stories is hugely important to the county of Leicestershire. I chair the Veterans Committee, and it is always the highlight of the agenda when the representative from the Century of Stories speaks and shows some of the film and some of the research which they've been doing to the veterans. They really appreciate it and listen intently. So it is a hugely important part of the county. Also, we are very blessed within the county of Leicestershire, the support the county give to the military.
If this conference would take place at the Royal Armouries or the National Army Museum, you wouldn't get that wide range of community involvement within the audience, and that's what's so important here. You know, this is a conference about the people, for the people, and it's really super.
So we're at this great Central Railway in Loughborough today. We're here for the final stages of our project that we've been doing with the Century of Stories, which is a murder on the Mapperwell Express. The project with the Century of Stories has really sparked an interest in the students researching the period of history of when the World War took place. So we've got Sherlock Holmes, that we found was a popular feature of the Strand magazine at that period of time. We've got Jack the Ripper, who allegedly was a soldier in the First World War.
So my character, his name is, I call him Robert Rice. He's a very stuck-up, very flamboyant kind of character. He is probably from the upper class, and he's putting on his new plays across the UK, you know, just trying to distract everyone from the horribleness of World War I.
For me, this project is about the way they've developed socially with each other. When I think back to the start of the project, they wouldn't even go to Miss Wardle's room at lunchtime. They wouldn't talk to each other, they wouldn't communicate, they'd sit on desks by themselves. As the project's evolved, they mix with each other, they communicate, they have a lot of teamwork together. This has had a massive impact on, you know, their learning in school, the way they've developed, and they even now socialise outside of the school setting, you know, at weekends and after school, which is absolutely phenomenal to see. The progress and the transformation that the kids have had through being involved in the project is amazing.
I enjoyed it today, and when it's done and we've all edited, you know, put together the captions and the you know, all the music, and then we post it on the Century of Stories YouTube page for all of you guys to see.
The Century of Stories team have thoroughly enjoyed the last 4 years, especially being invited to share such precious memories with wonderful and amazing people across Leicestershire. So thank you. Together we have built nationally award-winning and groundbreaking projects, and the legacy of Century of Stories will be sharing and connecting for years to come. Century of Stories may be coming to an end, but your heritage journey may have only just begun.
That's it. Mrs. Broadley.
Thank you, Chair. I'll comment on that in a second. First of all, our apologies if they could be recorded for the visit that unfortunately we had, myself and Miss Newton had employment committee that day, and obviously couldn't go. But if another visit could be arranged, we would be more than delighted to go. The original report that we had at this committee was for a large development and costing a large amount of money. Looking at this, I mean, I've got to say I wasn't at the last meeting here, so maybe I've missed it. But this report has gone to Cabinet and been approved on February the 20th about it being broken up into two different parts, and with the Records Office and the new building that you've showed us coming here. Did it come to this committee for us to have a look at, to give our opinions or anything before it went and was approved, is the first question. I obviously represent Oadby and Wigston, and the Records Office is in Wigston. So I totally disapprove of it coming here, not only because it's in Oadby and Wigston, and knowing the thoughts of the people in Oadby and Wigston the last time it was mooted to go somewhere else. I accept the building that it's in is not right for it now, but to come here, it's not central to anybody. It's difficult to get to. The car parking here is horrendous, and it was mentioned at the chair's meeting this morning that there are going to be no extra car parking. It's not going to encourage people to come. The film I thought was fantastic. It was lovely, but it was around the county. It wasn't centred at County Hall. County Hall is busy enough as it is without putting more in. I'm sure that there could be a more suitable place in one of the districts. The county council, as we've discussed previously, own land in lots of places, that the transport links could be better. They're not good here. No extra car parking. I just, well, obviously, from my point of view, I don't like it at all. I think the service that you give to the county is fantastic. I have no objections on that. It is purely bringing the Records Office and even the hub to County Hall on an overcrowded site, which it is. You know, we keep moving and manoeuvring people around and about, trying to squeeze in the extra space. But it doesn't solve the issues of transport for people to come. It doesn't solve the issues of the car parking. And so, from my opinion, I just don't like this new proposal. Thank you.
I'll kick off and make a response before Nigel might want to follow it up. I suppose what I would say is this is the third option now that's been looked at for the redevelopment of the Records Office. Third option on County Hall site, actually. So it's not this particular option that's been taken forward and that's been approved through Cabinet and then approved through full council. It's not a new direction of travel, in that both the previous two options were also based on the County Hall site. County Hall is within one of the districts of the County Council. It's in Blaby district, so I appreciate that it means moving from one district to another district, but to speak of County Hall as not being part of the county, I'm not sure is entirely accurate. It does mean that the Records Office would move from Oadby and Wigston into Blaby. I think in terms of accessibility, we are as accessible as any other area of the county. We're not proposing to site the Records Office centrally within the city. We are proposing to retain it in the county, where on a major road network there is a bus that stops just outside every 15 minutes. I appreciate that there are issues potentially around parking. I think that's probably an issue wherever we look to site the building. Clearly the proposal that we're putting forward is a more economic proposal than was previously the case. So the two previous proposals were, as Nigel has said, between 16 and 35 million. The phased development that we're looking at now is an initial development of 10 million with a potential £3 million development as a phase 2. which is obviously more affordable. The return on investment is much better. But I appreciate that we're not returning the record office, or not proposing to return the record office within Wigston.
I'll just add to that. When we bought the paper originally, we outlined sort of a variety of options. We did look at other sites across the county, but there was no other council-owned land that was available at the time that we did that. So any other options would have incurred additional costs in terms of purchasing land to sort of build such a site.
The original paper, as I say, I might have missed it, so please excuse me if I have, but the original paper was looking at sites around the county for the whole thing, as I understand it. It wasn't looking at it to do it as in phased mode. It's because at the time I remember suggesting the site that is just round the corner from the Records Office in Wigston, that was the old Burkitt House School, which is County Council owned land. And I was informed then that it wasn't big enough for the Records Office and the hub and everything else. So to say that we've looked, where did we look around for it in parts rather than as a whole? And the other thing, yes, I accept that County Hall is in Blaby District, the edge of Blaby District, really. It's not the hub of everything, as I would consider. It is a bit out on a limb, whether it be in Blaby District and I am not saying that I mean, obviously from a resident's point of view, I would love it to remain in Oadby and Wigston, but that is not where I'm coming from. I'm not saying that it has to remain. It could go to Blaby, but somewhere that is more accessible than County Hall, which I drive and I don't find County Hall particularly accessible. Thank you.
When we did the work, we did look at all sorts of options in terms of what we had to do. Some of them were in different sort of different bits. Some of them were the whole building. I think at the end of the day, we had to make a really pragmatic decision, which balanced up our requirements for the record office and the advantages of bringing together the collections in a single site, and balance that against the cost. In terms of what that would mean for us as an authority. So I think sort of what we've tried to do here is take a balanced view in terms of what that option is.
Before we move on, just to come back to Mrs. Brawley's first point about the chronology of things, I mean, we had a paper come to this committee which gave the two options. We were told at that point that further options would come back to this committee prior to a decision being made. But what we've had is a decision prior to it coming to this committee, because it's gone through cabinet. Is that not the case, or have I misunderstood? Because when we looked at the original two options, the 34 million and the 17 million, which was for the whole item, because at that point it was deemed that both were too expensive, it said that alternative options would come back. Now, I appreciate it's gone through full council as part of the capital budget, but as part of a one report, and therefore there wasn't the option to look at part of one report in the same way. But I think there is the additional concern that Mrs. Brawley is that, are we going to have some dedicated parking spaces for people visiting the collection? Because otherwise, without that, it would seem to make it more inaccessible than it currently is. But I know Richard wants to come back.
So there's certainly been no intention from anybody at this table here to take scrutiny out of it. That's not how we do things. I think it's pretty obvious, and I made it quite clear, that the money involved in the other schemes was so ridiculous that I was not very happy about it as a member of the cabinet. I just felt it was the wrong thing to do, to spend that amount of money at the difficult economic time that we're in now. So I had some real concerns about it. So effectively, work has just continued on other solutions, which has involved trying to get the value for money, because of course we will make a saving on managing the collection. That's one of the reasons we're doing it. If we don't make a saving, then there's no reason for doing it, regardless of almost where it goes. So that it is driven partly by the money. So I guess overall we couldn't just stop and fit it in. This is ongoing. So any comments that come in now about parking or anything else will still feed into the process just the same. It's actually just evolving. We haven't reached the end of this line so far. This is evolving all the time, and therefore comments today will be as relevant as they would have been 2 months ago.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much. And again, the chairman has thanked the staff very much indeed for the day out, a half day out we had. A couple of things. Carrying on from Councillor Broadley, Mrs. Broadley's point, I think wherever it moves to would cause problems. It's not easy for me in Barrow-on-Soar to get to Oadby and Wixton, and no more than for Mrs. Broadley to get to Barrow from Oadby and Wixton. County Hall has its problems, but at the same time it's easier to get to in many ways. I think also, as I see it, it's not just a case of modifying a building. The requirements to keep the records office, the conditions it has to be kept in, and the same with the collection, which was very clearly pointed out to us on our visit. And I do hope next time, nearly everybody, I would invite all the council to go actually, is you can't just say, right, we'll change this room and make it something else, because the conditions, the papers have to be kept in, the humidity, the temperatures, the strong rooms, everything else. Sometimes it is cheaper, especially with modern building methods, to build a purpose-built unit rather than try and modify something else. What I would also like to point out, not moving off from buildings now, we did raise questions, which I know have been raised by many people, is how we select the stuff for the collections, and how we decide, if we've got 100 uniforms that are all identical, but they're all from Leicestershire. We don't want 100 uniforms all identical from Leicestershire. So I think it was very pertinent and very good to see in the report, particularly on page 94, paragraph 36, that we're doing, this sort of just shows some of the things we can do, is that we were doing an audit, if you like, and we actually made £550,000 by going through the collection and selling it, some of it. I think also we have to be dealt with very carefully of how we take on bits and pieces. I was very fascinated because of the equipment, what we do with the schools, and I don't know that all schools make use of it, but I would encourage them to. Whatever we do, I think with a bit of careful planning, we could make this, and particularly moving some of the equipment, where the collection is kept in the Eastern Annex at the moment, really isn't suitable. Now, if we could have the whole of the Eastern Annex, that would be different. But, you're walking through offices to get to things. This collection and the record office belongs to the public. It doesn't belong to us councillors. We are, if you like, the guardians of it, and the council is the guardian of it. But we've got to make it accessible. We've got to encourage people to come. I don't know where in Leicestershire you would build it where everybody could get to it easily. I don't come from Leicestershire. I moved up here 30 odd years ago, and I worked on the Hay Hill Industrial Estate where the Barrow hub is. I worked there for over 20 years, and for 19 of those years I didn't even know the hub was there, and I went there every day to there. So I do think we need to make sure, and I think this will give pride to people, where it goes, what it does. I think it was unfortunate that we didn't have an opportunity, Chair, to scrutinise it more thoroughly before it went to Cabinet and full Council. Maybe time, pressure of work, I don't know. But it would have been nice to have been able to scrutinise it a bit more thoroughly. Thank you very much, though.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, I'm only a sub, and I hear about the original reports and the two options. And I'd like to make comments as I see the report in front of me, which I'm scrutinising. Now, I think Fran and Nigel do fantastic jobs. I think it is a really, really interesting report, which sets out the maintenance and some of the things. And I hear what Hilary is saying. We need to sort out some of this stuff. We need to have a policy. And I hear what Linda is saying. There are issues of car parking, etc., etc. I also note that the importance of a hub to protect and care for public artifacts is really, really important. And I also know that it would be absolutely beneficial to have a set out in paragraph 11, Snipston, Cherier Centre and everything together in one. So whatever. However, whereas I can only speak for myself here, I'm sort of confused with this report. Now, on number 1, it says the purpose of the report is to provide the committee with an update on proposals to develop a collection and learning hub. Okay, so these proposals to me were just a quick flick of something I saw earlier on, which almost seemed to be a fait accompli. This is what we're getting. Now, I can't recall at any time any scrutiny or a report, even to the cabinet, unless I wasn't there or whatever, because I attend quite a few and read the papers, where this has been decided. So I think that bit, to provide with an update. So what's the update? What is there? What we're going to do and whatever. And then it carries on saying, including an update on the management and maintenance and the governance of the museum service. Well, I don't see how those two amalgamate, in my opinion, because the update and the management and the governance of the museum service is a different item and should be a different report to look at it, to look at the policy and how we're going forward. However, a report on a total new collections hub, what it is, what it looks like, the cost, the finance, where it is situated, should be a different report altogether. This whole thing is just a mess. Well, sorry, maybe a wrong word. In my mind, it's a mess and I can't focus what am I actually scrutinising and making a comment on. So, then going back, it is, are we going away here? And once we're saying our bit, are we giving rubber stamping a decision that is somehow made to the picture we've seen there without actually knowing anything other and just little snippets which are buried in the report? And I find that very, very disappointing. So, I can't really, as I'm a sub, but I hope that maybe some members ask for another report. One, and what is actually proposed, as in the learning hub, as it stands, as the building, etc., with, a proper report, and another one on the management. And I leave it to you, Chairman, but I don't feel I can actually comment in more details because I haven't seen what you have been privy to previously.
John.
Thank you. Just to pick up that last point, the reason that we've got the report is because that's what we were asked to provide at the last committee meeting. So at the last committee meeting, we were asked to bring a report on the updated collections and learning hub proposals together with commentary around the collection and the management of the results. So that's why you've got a single report, because that's what we were asked to bring to committee. In terms of being able to scrutinise the collections and learning hub proposals, the proposal was taken to cabinet as part of the MTFS report. and it's part of the capital programme. So it was contained within the capital programme of the MTFS report, which went to Cabinet at the beginning of February and was then taken through full council and agreed at full council. So obviously, what was agreed within the capital programme and within the MTFS report was an overall allocation of funding for the development of the Records Office, phase 1 of the 2-phase development. The second phase would be then subject to a further business case, which would then so the second phase is part of the future plan for the capital programme. It's not contained within the capital programme. It's earmarked as part of the future development fund. There will, of course, be a full business case that will need to be developed to develop the Records Office on the County Hall site. That business case will go into great detail about issues around the building itself, the development process, the accessibility, the parking, etc. We can obviously bring those reports back through scrutiny before any decisions are taken on the business case, so that members will have an opportunity to review those proposals and to consider those proposals and to comment on those proposals. That business case hasn't yet even commenced. It was only a couple of weeks ago that the council agreed the proposals. So Fran and Nigel will be working closely with colleagues in property services and in other areas of the department of the council to build that business case, and I'm sure that once we've got a draft business case to consider, which would itself go in front of Cabinet, we can come through scrutiny first.
May I come back through you, Chairman? Okay, I hear all of this, but I'm still uncomfortable. Because if I'm looking at this report, in number 3, it says that a business case and the creation of an archive was approved and Cabinet resolved. Okay, it approved a creation for a business case, etc. I'm going with that. Option B says that the Option 2, creation of archive hub and campus, I go with that as well. For a business case and resource to be developed, I go with that. And I'm also fully aware that on the 8th of February, there was money in the medium-term financial strategy, which is also fine. But that doesn't mean that that money has got to be spent on, because it hasn't been, I haven't seen a report where it actually says, following the Cabinet approval to develop, because you've approved the money and to develop a case. You've never actually approved a definite learning to the existing space within the Eastern Annex. Now, unless I've missed it, I have never seen anything. So, to just humour me, pardon?
Read the end of the paragraph, it's there. I'm not sure
Yes.
I'm not pros or cons, but honestly, it is there.
Yes, but where was it approved? At what point?
If you actually look on the 8th of February 2019, sorry.
No.
I don't want to.
No.
I'm just looking at the time.
No.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the time, and it's all in the paper, Chair, and I'm getting frustrated because I've been here
Oh,
since
I'm glad you get frustrated, because I get frustrated with me for a change, because I get frustrated with you many a times.
Can you just hold, Rosa, just hold on hold on 1 second. 1 second. I think what would be useful before you carry on is, could John just give us the chronology of what is happening now when? So when is the business case likely to be done? When is it likely to be available? When is it likely to come back? So I think all this can be achieved by understanding what the timeline is going forward.
Sorry, Chair, if I can, Section 2 of your report says on the 6th of March 2018, the minutes from the meeting in 2018 said that the Director advised the final business case was being put together would include details. The option of using the site on the former Burkitt House School had been looked at, but discounted it was deemed too small. Proposed development would future-proof the storage needs of all 3 councils for 25 years, which is part of the brief. The pressure on parking at County Hall site was recognised, and the business plan would be asked to seek to address the availability of public parking spaces, as this was key to accessibility. And that if the Cabinet agreed the business case, the department would consult with experts in the field, such as Leicester University, in the building of the hub. And the outcome of this committee at the time was that the Cabinet be advised that this committee, i.e. your Scrutiny Committee back in March last year, support the proposals now outlined for a new collections hub. So you did go through the 5 proposals, the 5 options, and that was your conclusion on it. So
no,
it shouldn't be a complete surprise.
I didn't say it was a complete surprise. What I've said is that it came here with the options that were available. What was never here was the third option, the 10 million, to build something at the front along the design we've seen tonight, which has come to this committee as a surprise. So nobody's saying we don't want the collections hub together. I think Fran will know from the visit we had that what we are very keen on is to ensure accessibility to the community, to the collections hub, the fact that it can be worked on and stored properly to maintain it for the heritage of Leicestershire, and that accessibility is a key theme for that, both within the collections hub or externally within museums and other facilities, be they schools or otherwise. I think what came as a surprise to this committee is not the plan to do something with the hub, but the split it into 2 halves of a new records office here, together with perhaps something to be done in the eastern annex, rather than see it cogently together. Now, you know, we can put 10 million in a budget line, I accept, but that doesn't actually show this committee where it's going. And when it's part of an overall MTFS, you're not going to go through bullet point by bullet point on a council meeting to determine where it is. So what we're trying to ascertain is, I think John's answered this in some ways, is that no business case for that extension of the building has yet been done, so we don't even know if it's going to be 10 million. What we're trying to find out is what is the time scale for it, and what work is being done to ensure accessibility to that part of the collections hub and the wider collections hub, because we all agree, I think, in this room that we see it as a massively valuable thing for Leicestershire and the people of Leicestershire, and all we're seeking is, I think we're all on the same side here, is all we want to do is to ensure that we do the best possible we can within the realms of the finance that we have available as a council. And we fully accepted at the time that 34 million was way beyond the ability of this council to pay. So I think we're just trying to get an idea of when we can look at it perhaps in more detail, and is there an opportunity for this committee not to make the final decision because that's with Cabinet quite clearly, but to shape any proposals that Cabinet consider.
Hi. There's work on a new business case for the records office element. The proposal has started now, and we anticipate that that will be available end of April, May time. So we can have that's for John to sort of decide about when that comes back. I think we would complete that piece of work and then start the business case on the second phase of the proposal. I think you're right that the first phase of the business case needs to make reference to the second in terms of how that unifies in relation to the original vision for the collections hub. But I think we're clear that we need to make the records office provision work in isolation and then potentially show the additional benefits around the second phase of the project.
Yeah, so just to follow, depending on how quickly the business case progresses, we could either bring that back to the June committee or to the September committee. Depending, I mean, Fran's talking about a time scale that might be sort of April, May time. If we hold to that, then there's a possibility we can get back to the June committee. If not, we'll bring it back to the September committee.
Thank you for that, John. Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I think most of what I was going to say, members over there have said, and you have yourself. I wasn't here on this committee when it originally came to it, but reading the report, I was disturbed that members of this committee hadn't had any input, or not much input, on the final decision. But anyway, going back to what I was going to comment was that I found the report very interesting and very detailed, and I'd like to thank officers for it. I'm interested in history, and a lot of the stuff that they've got in the museum collection I wasn't aware of. So, you know, a really good detailed report from the officers on that. I would like to pick up on the car parking issue, though, because I saw an email flying about last week about staff and members parking on yellow lines and parking on grass verges. So obviously there's a problem already without putting any extra in there, and I would like to ask that that would be one of the things that they looked at, providing some extra parking, because it really is an issue some days. Other days it's fine.
Mr. Parton.
I was actually going to talk about car parking as well, merely to say that I think from a planning point of view that in your business case you would need to know what your footfall is. I appreciate Mrs. Broadley's not happy about the relocation, but you know, currently in your area, what is your footfall? You know, what's your visitors' times and days? And then of course then you need to know your capacity here. So actual spaces, available spaces, where would these spaces be in relation to this new building for the public to reach to? And I don't think you can possibly go ahead with it until you're absolutely certain that you've got the enough spare capacity for the anticipated footfall on any day of the week. No, I don't think you would get any planning application, large planning application at district level that should pass, where this hasn't been properly studied. Almost sometimes in the private sector by a private company that's actually hard to do that. So it's a serious matter.
I think probably more a comment as well. Ms. Newton. Oh, you don't want to come back now? Right? Oh, sorry. You waved at me earlier. Over to Fran.
Just a little bit of a response with regard to, you know, what is we recognise as a genuine issue around parking. So the original business case proposals and certainly the revised ones will make allocation for some reserved or some allocated spaces for record office users only at a similar level to the spaces that we currently have for the Records Office in Wigston. We do acknowledge that the location in Wigston is favoured by the fact that there are a number of public car parks within the vicinity, but they would be a similar number to what we've got there at the moment. And the paper does reference the current visitors to the Records Office, and we are doing some analysis in terms of when users come and how that visitor flow works, so we know when peak periods would be. And obviously the Records Office is open at the weekends and early evenings when County Hall tends to be quieter as well. So that's all work that will be looked at as part of the business case.
Mrs. Broadley.
Just very quickly, because we all want to go home. You say allocated car parking. I would want extra car parking, because if we're allocating so many spaces for the Records Office here, we're taking it from somebody else, whether it be staff, whether it be NHS staff or whoever else is in this building. So I wouldn't want to just see allocated, I would want to see how we create extra car parking spaces here. Thank you.
Just on that, it's just a few years ago the fire service used to have separate headquarters here. We had separate parking. I don't know if that parking is still there. If it is, I wonder if that could.
The short answer is we don't know, but we can find that out and take that on board. Yeah.
Mrs. Page.
On the car, and I've never disputed that it isn't a fantastic report and whatever, but just my last point on item 18, or paragraph 18, it said that the Record Office received 11,393 visitors. So when you're doing that business case, I was so keen to see and hope maybe it is worth looking at providing some underground car parking or whatever. It might not cost a fortune, but it, you know, it's worth looking at. Just point of view.
Right, I think in the absence of any other questions, I think hopefully it's left both our cabinet member and the officers with the view that we are very passionate about the records and the collection. We see it as a great archive for the benefit of all of our residents. So the thrust of our conversation is not to criticise or have a go at the plans, merely to help shape those plans so that we can achieve the best we can within the financial envelope we have. And we are happy as a committee to be heavily involved in helping to do that going forward. So if I could thank everybody for what has been a interesting but slightly lengthy day, and we can all now head out into the rush hour because timing is perfect. So thank you all.